right, so welcome back to A Cast on Titan, and this is the first Abberant cast that we've done in a couple months since the
Woo!
Levi Abberant, which a lot of people liked. So hopefully this one will go over really well as well. With me are still Scott
Hi.
and Robot,
Hey,
and in this Aberrant cast, we're going to talk about the recent OVA that came out that Robot helped with the translation for, and we're also going to talk about the visual novel based around Annie. And that visual novel discussion will end up being what we used to refer to as the Annie Aberrant, the infamous Annie cast. So, to get started with, we're going to talk about the OVAs. Um, what were your guys' impressions of the OVAs?
The recent one was I, I don't I kind of want to sugarcoat
Be
it, but I
careful,
really
Scotty. Be careful,
okay.
because I think we're going to have an unpopular opinion here.
Yeah, well, then here I go. I'm just gonna jump right into it. I think it was a travesty. I think it was literally I was just cringing. I couldn't possibly imagine how I could get any more out of touch with like any AOT related material. How I could be so distant to where I literally was searching other like I was checking my Facebook as I was watching it because I really didn't care at all. It gave no new information that was pertinent to the story, no new character development revelations. It, in my opinion, confused me about certain characters. It like especially Marco. We'll talk about that later, but honestly, I'm glad he's dead now that I watched this. I mean, it made me think. I'm glad that character died. He would have been a shitty character if he survived based on
Yikes.
this.
Strong words there.
But I'm being honest because Stiller and I, we watched this AMV basically at the same exact time, and we were chatting about it in Skype, and we it seemed like 99% of everything that Stiller and I were conversating about was a negative. I say 99% because I'm not 100% sure that everything was a negative. In fact, no. The tree scene was cool. I think that was literally one of the only positives we said about this entire
Well, for you, I
AMV.
thought the team up for Annie and Mikasa
Oh,
was cool.
okay. That's true. So two things out of I think 60 things we conversated about were positive. 58 of those were just downright negatives. And I guess we'll go into detail about those negatives.
When
I'm
he,
I'm sh
you can tell this is after hours when he starts saying things like conversated.
That's a word, isn't it? Or it is after hours though. Oh my gosh. I think it's a word. Anyway, that's it on my opinion. For just the overall what I
Just for
thought
the
about it.
impressions.
Yeah.
As Scotty mentioned, I also at first when it first came out, I watched the raw of it. I watched the raw uh, translated version of it, and I was like, all right, well this is kind of cool. This will tide us over until the next one comes out, and it's a fun little side story about rescuing Historia from a thing. It could, it's all right. Just that's how it looked from the raw. But then I watched it sort of nearly at the same time Scotty did, and I was like, man, there's just so many things about this that I don't like. Just point after point after point after point where I was like, why? you know?
Yeah.
So, just overall, generally speaking, I also had a negative impression.
for me personally, it's not like anything about it was like, I guess, particularly offensive to me. And I don't mean like actually offensive, but like bad. It was just like Aaron and John were just like being children to each other. Marco's a pushover. Armin is still a pushover at this stage in his character development. Historia does, or Krista does nothing but get captured and say like stop. I have to come up with like four variations of that line for
mm,
Krista.
mm,
So she's basically just like this female. She's just the damsel in distress.
yep.
Um. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure we got more like interesting character moments in the second OVA than we did in this one. And
Absolutely.
the second OVA was craziness. So
I kind of like.
I mean,
I mean, overall, the first one I thought was really good. Not that one didn't even have Annie in it.
the first
It's
one
true.
definitely expanded upon the little side chapter we got in like in a way that I enjoyed. It gave people a little bit of like SOS Squad development. I guess not that we really needed it retroactively,
Right.
but it like expanded things into a full 22-minute episode, and it was good. And the second OVA, okay, they clearly went in a different direction, and I guess it was funny. Pixis was crazy, and the third OVA is just a lot of not much happening that's really interesting. That's all I have to say about it. Like Ymir is not even in it, so there's no meaningful, trainee time Ymir Krista interactions. There's just, Sasha making food jokes. That's original. That's great.
I don't
Like-
know. I don't know how many times I have to look back at that scene where Aaron is yelling at John, and they're arguing with each other, and Sasha just randomly says lizards are delicious.
Like she's trying to distract them, I think, but it's just like, oh, it's like, are we
What?
Yeah, it's
are we doing this again? I guess we are.
Well,
Like,
when she said that and the camera cut back to her, she had like this pouty face, and she looked like upset. Like, what happened in that scene?
I feel like we've hit the saturation point for like Sasha jokes where it's starting to feel like we're just making fun of her for being like a hungry child, and I'm just like, now I feel bad, like, so. And yeah, overall that OVA didn't really do anything for me. It didn't really improve Marco's character at all. I think Isayama himself said that he thought Marco was boring and couldn't bring him anywhere, and so he died.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
see why, because there's nothing that Marco brings to the table that Marlo doesn't really do better. He dies. I guess that's good for Jean's development. I felt like the one thing that Marco said that was like mildly interesting was his final line, which he was like, "Oh, I wonder what kind of soldiers we'll be,"
Yeah.
which is just like such a clearly like trying to poke at my emotional heartstrings that I was just like, okay,
Yeah.
Marco, we know you
Yeah.
die. We know you die in 2 years. That sucks. Okay. Yeah.
all right. Let me delve into the specifics of. Okay, now why I
For
feel
for
like-
for him, Marco was a detractor. Like his character actually got worse.
absolutely, like, okay, I just want to like defend the statement. I feel like this was a tragedy because that's a very harsh statement, and I'm sure people think like, oh, you don't really mean tragedy or travesty, but it's like, okay, there's one thing when a story doesn't catch my interest, like that's already, I would consider that bad because if there's only one job that an anime has or a manga has, it's to keep me interested in the material. And if it can't do that at a very basic level, I consider it bad because that's the entire point of you writing or animating this. And not only did it not do this, but it didn't make sense in so many parts that I'm just like, this is just bad writing and just storytelling in general. But this is just bad in general. So the first point, which actually Stiller made to me, which got us on this negative tirade when we were chatting, which was, and I think you know what I'm gonna say, Stiller, when you were like, the entire premise of this entire OVA is just bad, which is like, oh, they're going on this random mission which serves zero purpose. Because, number one, if you want to go and be under the assumption that, of course, the instructors didn't know there were going to be bandits. So then, what was going to happen without bandits? They were going to ride, have like a road trip, 40 miles or 40 kilometers, whatever. They're going to say, hey, what's up, nothing much, what you see, nothing much, solo get-go, that's cool. Then ride back. That was going to be the entire trip. Like, what was that supposed to prove?
We get 2 minutes into the OVA, and the idea for this mission is that we want you to be able to stay alert and be aware of your surroundings, even
if you're bored out of your mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even in situations where there's nothing going on, you need to be aware of things.
Which is probably the worst possible way for a storytelling point of view to keep my interest.
Man, does that
Like-
premise scream, we have nothing for them to do.
Exactly.
They could have done anything else from their training days. There are things I would want to see. Like, we could do any other character interaction but them riding away on horses.
How many people
Exactly.
were excited by the prospect of OVA 3 containing the Mikasa versus Annie scene? How
That would be
how
awesome.
many dreams were crushed?
Like, I don't know. And they didn't even feature any of the interesting. They didn't really feature any of the interesting character pairings either. They didn't have Krista and Ymir in any fashion, right? Ymir wasn't even like in it, right? I don't think she had an appearance.
No, she wasn't even in it. Not at all.
We didn't have any like interesting Reiner Bertold stuff that we could have seen, maybe. Although this is pretty early in their training, so I don't think Reiner would have like really gone like crazy yet.
Berthold was barely even there.
He had like, I think it was one line. He was like, "Oh look, there's carriage tracks over there." Thanks,
Oh, wow,
Bertold.
interesting. Thank you.
You're here. Check that off the list.
Honestly.
Like they could have had Annie and Mikasa talking to each other, and it would have been more interesting.
They could have been talking about the weather, and it would have been tense, and people would have been like,
Yeah,
this
it would
is
have
actually
been-
kind of exciting.
Yeah, they would have done it in like veiled threats about the weather, and they would have been standing a distance away while Eren tries to calm both of them down. Like I don't know
Yep.
what it would have been. It would have
Yep.
been better.
Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And like I guess I should feel slightly offended that Krista exists only to be like damsel in distress.
At
basically.
this point in
exactly.
the story, it fits for her though, because at this point in the story, she was still not developed in the way that we know her now.
That is true, but it's even then it's boring. So that
Even then, it's a trope, which is not cool, but at least it almost makes sense.
yeah.
Almost makes sense.
My second point, which I brought up to Stiller again, was I couldn't get over the scene when the bandits had them surrounded when they were asleep. And they said, "Alright, give us all of your gear." And they were like, "Alright, shit, I guess we gotta give them all gear." So then they gave them all of their gear. And then they said, like, "You better not follow us, you whippersnappers." And then they just, like, hitched it out of there. It's like, wait a minute. So they literally have no weapons, no gear. They're all in a circle, like, just, and you have them surrounded. These are the only people who know that you have this gear, and the only people who could potentially stop you. Not only that, you know that these are trained soldiers, or soldiers in training, so they have the capability to stop you. Not only that, but there's only one town you could possibly go to sell this gear, so you know that these people who you have just stole from essentially automatically know where you're going to be. And you're just like, let them go. They're just young whippersnappers.
I think it's like supposed to. I think it's supposed to be like the implication that it's part of the training exercise is like the only real explanation I can give for why they would be such a poorly planned out operation.
I don't think so.
But-
I mean,
Nobody ever said the bandits were smart.
no, but
Maybe
okay,
that's why they're bandits.
Yeah.
there's a reason. There's a difference between smart and like I'm brain dead. Okay, and number two, like, what is the point of you pointing your guns and intimidation towards the people you're trying to rob when if somebody literally acts out and tries to take your gun, presumably to shoot you with them? No, everyone just stands around like, well, shit, this is the honor system. We're gonna see if this guy's tough enough to fight off this guy who's resisting arrest or resisting being robbed. Like, when Eren fucking tried to take the gun, it's like, okay, isn't this literally the exact moment you're supposed to shoot your hostages when they act out and try to take your gun? Like, what other reason are you pointing your gun at them? Like, there's
Well,
no
I
other.
think- Like everything you point out does make it like seem more likely that it is like a training exercise because it's just everything about it somehow prioritizes the safety of the trainees while being vaguely threatening. But
Didn't they literally like kill people though? Like, isn't that a thing? Like, didn't they like take
threw-
out some of those bandits?
Yeah, but I mean, at worst, they were thrown out of a speeding carriage and possibly broke their necks. So,
Yeah, I mean, these are some really hardcore,
training exercises, the
like
mind
this
games are
is
intense.
honestly, like, literally, people could have gotten killed. I mean,
Someone
jeez.
lied to us when they said that we were gonna be bored.
And wait, oh, and number two, if this was a training exercise, why did the conversation in the carriage go on when only Krista was around? His, aka Historia. And when she was like, "Oh, we're gonna sell this girl at the black market or whatever," like, who are they trying to? Are they trying to intimidate her for no reason? Like, are they just like horrible people?
Which is
Exposition.
like they're really into their role play. Like they're trying to like it's like method acting because they're
Yeah.
actually you know
Us.
scouting legion people or not scouting legion. I guess they would be garrison. I
I
guess.
guess. I guess.
The one that killed me was Marco and the Rock.
Oh my God, Mark. You said
Wait,
that.
what do you mean Marco and the Rock?
The time when they set their trap or whatever to try and figure out which carriage had Krista and the gear, and Marco closes his eyes and leans up against a rock and listens for the sound of one carriage being heavier than the other. Just
It
Wait,
makes sense, guys. Marco is a shifter.
oh my
Mark-
god,
Dude,
I died when I
the
saw
amount
that.
of the amount of frustration I can sense it through his Skype chat when he's like, "Yeah, about Marco and that rock, like what is?" And oh
Man,
my God, he was mad. It was enjoyable. It was such a great.
oh,
Um,
that wouldn't hurt.
I mean, I think he was like trying to listen for like the clank of the metal versus the sound of Krista's body hitting the carriage.
so stupid though because like, okay, number one, are these carriages like 80 feet apart? Like how can you
No.
possibly tell? How could you possibly tell like, oh my God, I heard that one precisely 80 feet behind the other one.
They were
Therefore, I
right
can
next to each
approximate
other.
square root divide by 85. I now know which carriage precisely has.
And if
Like
I hadn't closed my eyes, I could have done it.
like how about you just open your eyes and you see? Cause like isn't the back of the carriage like open? Like this isn't concealed shit. Like you can just like look in there and be like, oh, how about Marco? I fucking see the carriage with the
That's
gear.
definitely true because they were shooting out of the back of the carriage.
Yeah, it's like
Oh,
so unnecessary. All of this.
of everything in the OVA, that one was the one that got me. No,
Uh,
nothing else topped that one for me.
and okay. Also, what really got me was that Aaron like decided to march on to get Historia, and even Marco was like hesitant to get her when she was quote unquote stolen. It was like, or kidnapped, I guess is the better word. But when she was kidnapped, Marco was like hesitant, and they made it a point in the OVA to show his hesitation. And
Yeah.
then later
Oh
on,
shit.
like Marco was like, "Oh, I'm a bad leader." I'm like, "Yeah, you kind of are. I'm glad you're dead. Like you literally contemplated just like, well, she's gonna get raped and killed, I guess. Oh well, training's over, fellas. Let's go home. Let's call it a
M-
night."
Marco backed down super hard.
Yeah, it's like number one, and I even had to complain about like, why is Aaron the one taking the charge? Like Aaron doesn't have a personal connection with her at this
Well,
point.
Aaron's always been like kind of like a justice-oriented guy. It's pretty similar to the situation that happened with Mikasa, so I can understand. And Aaron's like, Aaron is Aaron, so I
I
can
guess.
understand. I can understand Aaron. Out of that group, I would say Aaron is definitely the most likely to be
Gun
leading
ho.
that charge, right? There's
Yeah, true.
Marco, Jean, Sasha, not Historia.
It's fairly obvious it should have been Ymir.
Yeah,
Honestly.
right. It
That-
should have been.
Because
Or Sasha. Sasha is friends with Historia, right? Like that's at least
yeah,
implied.
that's implied, yeah. But I mean,
At the very least, though,
this is your connection though. This is how you're presenting this enthusiasm to pursue this. Is Aaron being the only one going like he's basically just standing out like arms extended, going, man, this is bullshit, guys.
yeah, like are you all pussies? Like she literally just got kidnapped. Are you guys not just you're okay with going home right now and just saying, well, I guess we're gonna get to see now that we let Historia get raped. I guess it's not okay. It's like yeah, like like you guys all are okay morally with this happening, and like not only that, but like I'm okay with Aaron now that you kind of persuaded me, Robot. Like that Aaron would be the one that's gun ho about getting someone who was kidnapped. But like, why you gotta throw Marco under a bus? Like, why? Like, what is this all about? Why you gotta be like show Marco hesitate and be like, oh, I'm a pussy, I can't do this. Like, why would you highlight that? It's like, don't you want to see Marco in a better light? Like, why making an OVA to make a character look worse? That
Well,
seems so counterintuitive to me.
I guess they kind of want to show like Marco's progression, like
They're praying and they're hoping that you look at his progression from this episode being before episode 4 leading up to Trost and
like
see how much
he goes from not really doing anything with to that in that situation to like he like comes back from the mission and is like, all right, next time when one of my teammates gets kidnapped, I am not going to let them get kidnapped, and I will do something about it. Like,
I mean,
I'm not going to be okay with them being kidnapped.
Yeah, I am going to be morally questionable next time, and I won't.
I am
and I
going
won't
to consider doing something.
I won't be a horrible person who lets people get kidnapped and have no remorse for it. It's like, oh, okay, and it's like that doesn't even lead anywhere. You die like instantly after that. It's like, okay, so that went nowhere. Your character progression was so meaningless.
This OVA did not help him at all.
Yeah, it literally did nothing. So,
he got one meaningful line. It was his last line, right? That was
exactly.
Even that one's kind of pandering. That one's kind of, hey, this is a thing you know something about. Isn't this interesting?
Isn't it so sad? It's so profound. Look at what he's saying, and he dies. That's what makes it so. It's just like, okay, guy, okay, all right.
Hey, that's a reference to a thing I know. That's kind of cool. That's about all I got from that.
I don't think it was like it wasn't well written. There was no meaningful character interaction. It wasn't fun to watch. At least the second OVA had like the hilarity of like Pixis flying through the city in like a basically like high on LSD or something, and you had some pretty funny moments in the second OVA with like Reiner's deadpanness and massive shits.
And Armin falling down the stairs.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the second OVA was supposed to be funny, so, but, yeah.
It was interesting, the third one definitely was showing off that cast, though. You guys remember Thomas?
Oh, yeah, Thomas.
You guys remember Thomas? Who remembers Thomas?
Thomas.
Guess
why would you?
What?
I was like, why are you leading the charge, bro? Like, what are you doing?
Who are you again?
Yeah, like.
How is he the squad leader over
Mikasa, over Annie, over Reiner, over Bertholdt?
Like, not even like.
That's like half of the top 10, right?
Half the top 5, or it's the top 5 basically.
Jeez.
I give them props for at least like trying to give like a throwback Thomas, I guess. But then it's like
I'm sure Samuel was there somewhere too.
But it's like was there any justification for him being the lead? Like, was he a known good like soldier?
He died instantly. I mean, so did Eren, arguably. But I mean, no, I don't think so.
He was just there, and that was just the role they gave him so he could speak.
So why is Mikasa the record keeper? That's like the worst role for Mikasa. Mikasa probably wants to do anything but write in a journal about what rock they saw on their expedition.
The good news is that she would be good at monotonous tasks. So I could kind of understand that.
She's ready.
Her writing style captures the feel of the expedition very well.
Yes.
She's like, Marco just leaned against a rock and closed his eyes. I don't know what he's doing, but like I don't understand.
Actually, you know what would have been like better if we focused on the other group. The other group is more interesting. They have all the shifters and Mikasa.
Yeah.
It's so true. Oh my god, there's such wasted potential.
And the main character interaction being, it's like, oh look, Jean and Eren are arguing again. They're just, it's like, it was such a childish argument too.
Surprise. So. I mean, at this point in time, of course this is what they do. This isn't a surprise.
Yeah, it's like 1 year. It's like 1 year after. It's like 1 year into their training. So like, I'm not surprised, but it also doesn't give me anything of value.
Right.
Like, it wasn't like fun It wasn't like they were jerking each other's chains in a fun way. It wasn't like fun banter. It was like, oh my god, these two are children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Jean's deliberately pissing off Eren. Eren is pissed.
That campfire scene. Holy shit. What a dick.
And then like Armin's just an idiot because everybody's got to be like, "Yo, Armin, don't write that shit down, okay?" It's like, and Armin's just like, "Okay." It's like, what, Armin? Are you retarded? Like, clearly, don't write this shit down.
He's just
Like-
unsure of himself.
Like they painted him.
This is insecure Armin.
Yeah, but he's even at a young age. He's even at the first episode of the anime. He's supposed to be somewhat insightful and like thinking outside the box. He predicts like the prophecy when that the Titans are gonna invade and break down the wall to begin with. So it's like it's not like he hasn't developed to the point where he should know better.
He's wise
So-
beyond his years.
Yeah, so you should know, Armin. Like, don't write this down when someone's getting in a little fight, a tiff
Well,
that
hey,
doesn't mean
The
anything.
fun thing is that at the end of the OVA, he did it anyway.
Yeah, he's a jerk.
Because he told Shardus everything. Everything.
The only character that comes out well, I think, is Eren. It's like the only character that does anything like really noteworthy is Eren.
Even
it's like,
for
oh.
him, it's not unexpected.
Yeah, it's not like an unexpected development, but I guess at this point we should just praise them for being in character, right?
I praise
So-
Eren for being
Yeah.
a character.
Right. So, I mean, good job on Eren. He like stood up to a bunch of thugs with guns. Everyone else sucked and did nothing. He
Pretty-
was right to be angry.
You could say pretty well good job to everyone who didn't have dialogue except for Eren.
Yeah, if you had more than 5 lines of dialogue, you did a pretty bad job.
And I mean, Aaron, like, let's get real here. Like, he wasn't like, okay, the initial tiff with, or the Russell with the bandit, which was completely stupid, by the way. That was probably the stupidest movie he's ever pulled, because 99 out of like a million out of 1,000,001 chances you're gonna get shot in that position. Like, there's no way bandits are just gonna let you wrestle someone for their gun. Like, why would you do that? But even in that situation, like, clearly after the fact, you're like, hey guys, they didn't do anything when I tried to take the guy's gun. Maybe they're pussies. Let's go after them. Like, you guys notice they're not real bandits? Like, they would have shot me easily. It's so, okay, that's why I hate this OVA. It lacks so much common sense and so much logic that it's just the only redeeming quality was how Connie saved the day again with the tree. How he leaped and helped Sasha. Oh, that was the only redeeming quality.
Even
The
at
only
that,
redeeming quality.
anyone could have done that.
No, it was only Connie. He was the only one who had the ability.
Connie's the one who did it, but anyone could have done that.
No, absolutely
You
not.
basically got one GIF's worth of like 3D MG action. We got Mikasa and Annie saving the day again,
Yep.
which I guess okay, throwback or like
That's
foreshadowing
that's
or whatever.
the power trip right there. That's the powerhouse.
Yeah, that was nice. I guess. I don't know.
Connie,
I would have preferred.
Connie
I
doing
would-
his thing is what Connie was in this OVA for. He really didn't have any other business being in this OVA.
Nobody had any business even being in the Soviet.
Also, I just wanted to say, like, in terms of like flashback material, why did we go to Jean's parents? I would have preferred Connie's village or
oh my god, thank
Sasha's
you.
village or
Preaching.
anybody. Why Jean? Jean has never talked about his parents. His parents were like middle class, relatively speaking, lived inside the inner walls until the outer wall fell and so the inner wall became an outer wall. Like, that's not, I don't care about his parents. So why would you focus on
That
okay.
made me think. This
Speaking
entire
of parents, it was
Wait,
actually just a parent, right? We
It
didn't
was just his mom.
yeah.
You're right.
We didn't
Yeah.
even get we didn't even get the whole 9 yards on that.
I would have said, or I would say, this OVA could have been completely redeemed, if not in part redeemed, if we did a flashback to Jean's parents, and what if they were like poor and he had like nothing, and we just found out from this OVA that he was like lying to cover up the truth that he actually came from an impoverished area and he was trying to get out of that. That would be awesome to
That would
see.
be that would be amazing, but it would also be like a different characterization in the manga.
It would be.
But I would, at this point, I would welcome it. The last 2 OVAs haven't really, like, okay, I laughed a couple times during the second OVA, but like they didn't really bring me anything of value. Like I would take like an OVA of like a normal day in the trainee corps, but through like Bertolt's paranoid perspective, where he thinks everybody's
my
suspecting him,
God.
and he just sweats for the majority of the episode. Like I would be okay with that. I would be totally down with that.
How
I would
amazing
be-
would that be?
And we could get like scenes where like Bertolt is watching Annie train Eren, and he's like progressively like worried, or I don't know. We could have thrown in the scenes that they took out from Annie's like scenes in the trainee arc where she's training Eren. They took those out in the anime. They could have added those back in the OVA then. They could have done a number of any different things that probably wouldn't even require that much budget, and instead they went with this, which is disappointing.
Speaking of budget,
best.
I thought that was funny watching the beginning of this OVA when Shardus is explaining the mission and they cut to the pictures of the cadets standing there. It's literally a cut for that's literally a copy paste from that episode of the anime.
They also use the same
Yeah.
3DMG GIF, 3DMG
Yeah.
scene where they like zoom in on the CGI of it spinning the wires. I think
Literally
they do that
the
several
same
times.
thing.
I think they do it several times, so maybe it's like a visual motif that I'm not getting.
No, it's just a budget thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a budget thing. I mean, like, what other ideas for an OVA could we do that would be better than what we got?
Anything would be better than what we got.
I really like, Robot, your previous idea, which would be taking even this like a scene that doesn't hold much weight, but then flip it into the perspective of someone like Bertolt or Reiner or Annie or someone Ymir, someone who has secrets and agendas that they want to keep hidden, and then like see how they cope with it, and maybe reveal how something almost got revealed. There was a close call that the audience wasn't even aware of. I love when they do that, and that could have been like really interesting to see a life moment in the eyes of a character we didn't know at the time.
I definitely think Bertolt is probably going to be like the best choice for that, because for Reiner, his dissociation. Well, if it's Reiner, it's going to have to be like later in the training. I don't think Annie's internal monologue. For Annie's internal monologue to be interesting, I think it would have to reveal a lot of her past, really, and I don't think that's something that would happen realistically. But Bertolt, I think, would be like a prime candidate for like a season 2 OVA, maybe after the reveal, where like he just seems like he's the most distanced from everybody. He's like the only person he really talks to is Reiner. I believe they retconned in later in the guidebook that he's good friends with like Armin or something, probably to add like dramatic tension to his whole encounter during the chase scene. But just him talking, or like you said, a situation where their identities almost get revealed. Maybe, I don't know, anything would be like Bertolt's like such an interesting unexplored character in the anime that I think he could benefit from any extra screen time.
I feel like it could be Mikasa. I would like to see a Mikasa perspective where she has interesting thoughts.
That's also true, I think.
Because as long as her thoughts aren't something,
Interesting?
as long as her thoughts aren't something about Eren or something about,
Oh, I see.
you know what I mean? I want her to
I
be,
do.
I want to see into her perspective where she goes, this is what I think about this character. This is how I feel about this situation. I want an OVA for her would be perfect in fleshing out her character, because
Like,
what do we know about her personality?
They could do like maybe like some flashback stuff. Like I think it would be interesting maybe if like Mikasa wanted to know like about her family or about her like race. Supposedly she's like the last of this Oriental race that's based on the Asian race, right?
Yeah.
So like I feel like they could like maybe like when they're kids, like Mikasa like asks Armin to like if he knows about any, like she shows him her brand or something. She's like, do you know what this brand is? Or like they try to research what her brand means, and it turns out in the end she doesn't know, or like they can't figure it out, or like anything that gives us something would work.
I think so. I mean, it sounds like I'm just bashing on her like I normally do to say that I want to see her think interesting things, but what I would want from an OVA from her, and the reason I picked her because I think it would be good for her character, is that giving her an OVA would actually give her the opportunity to express herself more, because in the manga she doesn't get that hardly ever.
Well, like when I rag on Mikasa, like part of it is like Isayama's fault, because I feel, well, not Isayama's fault, I guess. Well, insofar that anything is his fault because he writes it. But like, I feel like there's like an interesting character like somewhere there that just never gets expressed because she, doesn't get these opportunities to.
Yeah.
I mean, the way she's written has been poor. I think that's like a legitimate statement that we can make, that she has not been handled the best way, and anything that sheds more light on her would be very welcome.
As far as it goes, I feel like the way that I would say it is that she's the character who has not been justified. Because if you look at any other character like her, practically anyone has those kind of details that you want. And for her to be one of the main three, one of the main characters who's supposed to sell your show, to be like this is just totally unacceptable.
Right.
I was thinking about characters that would be great to get their perspective from, and I think I've come up with the hands down most interesting, but it would be the
He's gonna
hardest.
say like Shallot or something.
No kitchen characters. Um, no, but it would be the hardest to pull off. But it would be Grisha. I feel like
Oh man,
if we got it from Grisha's perspective, like
no
what
way. That would
we
break the story.
The problem is that it would give us details that haven't been revealed in the manga, but
no, but that's why I'm saying, like, don't reveal anything. Like, you could make it like an average day. We don't even know what he does. Like, what's his job? He's a doctor supposedly, but what the hell does like
this would mean we would spend like 5 minutes on a scene where Grisha goes to like a fruit stand.
and he
You know?
contemplates the fruit. And,
Yeah.
but his thoughts are like so suspicious. He's like looking at the pomegranates. He's like, pomegranates. And then you start thinking about the pomegranate scene in Mikasa's, when like Mikasa's fallen in front of like the Titan, and you're like, oh, connections.
I guess
And it turns out he like turns around and picks a grapefruit.
it would be fun to do that, and I would actually almost like to see it done in a way that pokes fun at us theory crafting. I could like the way you just explained that. That would be a lot of fun to see.
like, wouldn't it be great? Like, okay, so it would go through his average life, and it wouldn't give away, obviously, like, oh, I'm creating a serum or anything. It would just be like him going to work and his thoughts and how he perceived, like, maybe he looks around and he's suspicious of people, which means he knows people are after him. That's interesting. What if, like, and then at the very end of the OVA, just to fuck with everybody, it ends with him entering the basement.
Yeah. I was getting ready to say they should tease us with the basement.
That would
And,
be a
like,
great tease.
wouldn't that be? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
That would just be great. They
I'm
could.
behind that.
I feel like they could pull off a Grisha. Obviously, you can't give away anything, but they could pull it off in a sense where maybe you get a little bit of detail into his thought process, who he thought of was an enemy. Maybe he knew ahead of time there was something going to happen. Maybe like he's healing someone, or like he's treating someone at the hospital, and someone's like, "Oh, I'm always scared of the unknown, and although the walls are protecting us, you never know." And then like his inner monologue's like, "You have no idea," or something like that. And then it's like, "Oh my God, he knows something, like ahead of time." And it doesn't give away anything, but it's just like maybe Grisha's knew a lot beforehand.
He needs to be at the fruit stand doing that scene with the grapefruit. He needs to turn and look across the market and see Jean's mom.
And she's a poor beggar,
And
and
he
you
and he
see
needs oh god. I don't even know what dialogue he would put in there. He
more change, please.
Well, I mean for what Grisha is thinking. I can imagine you can have a lot of fun with that.
He turns to her and is like, "That prostitute has veered too far from the corner."
Something
No,
along those lines.
no, but honestly though, I feel like Grisha could be a great OV. It would have to be so. It would be almost too much work though, to not give anything away. But at the same time, it would be worth it in my opinion.
So I think
And we could get some great like Carla Mikasa, Carla Eren interactions.
Very
I think.
true.
or Carla, just Carla, that'd be fine.
Carla would be cool.
I mean, you could. I guess the overall thing to take away from this is to say, if we were going to make an OVA, we would want to pick a character who needs to express more that we don't know enough about, without actually giving away any specific future plot details.
Or we could do like more of like a world building, as more expository kind of thing. We could focus on like what's the third division? The Garrison. We could focus on
Garrison,
we could focus on like Rico and Ian. What do Rico and Ian do on an average day? We know they have jobs.
What does
We know
Woerman do?
exactly like we know they're not as corrupt as the military police. We know they actually have jobs. They maintain upkeep on the walls, like, or stuff like that. Like maybe they have a story to tell, you know?
Is
true.
Woerman always an asshole, or was it just that one time?
He's probably always an asshole.
Yeah,
What if he's actually like the nicest guy, and he just like caught him on a bad day? Like maybe he has a kid that was supposed to like go to school or something for the first time that
fell off the wall.
yeah,
Killed.
yeah, something like that. And the whole thing with Trost happened that day, and he had to abandon whatever, going to like a
His morality.
yeah. Well, no, I was gonna say
One-
like abandoning, like taking his kid to a baseball game or something.
Oh.
You know?
One
Oh,
bad day.
devastating.
One bad day can ruin a person.
Exactly. That's
It's-
That would be great. I would love
Especially
that.
if your kid falls off a wall, that'll end your day.
Yeah.
Pretty abruptly.
That'll ruin your day for sure.
All of a sudden, like
At least you-
Warman walks up to Aaron, who's still out of it, and like you hear the "No More Mr. Nice Guy" theme come on, and he gets super pissed and he starts yelling at people. I would find that hilarious.
I just want to say that like a Sasha hometown or Connie's hometown OVA,
Yes.
I would buy that.
I would buy that on Blu-ray, DVD, floppy disk, anything that's gonna come out in the future.
You know what? I bet you don't have a floppy drive.
I'm not 100 years old still. Of course I don't.
So, was there anything else about the OVA that we needed to talk about?
I think in to summarize it,
Summarize it. It was bad.
bad. Connie cool. Everything else bad.
At best, it was boring, and at worst,
Yeah.
it was
The
bad.
worst thing. The worst related Attack on Titan thing, possibly.
At least I feel like it's like not even opinion, like okay, opinion obviously, but like in terms of like writing and how they handled certain situations, you have to make super assumptions that like at least the bandits were in on it, which there's no indication they were, like to even make it have any resemblance of like normalcy or logic based like OVA. If not, then it's just bad, like in general, bad writing.
So with that in mind, I'm sure that there are a lot of people on the subreddit who are curious about the translation process, because one of the things we talk about a lot on the podcast is translation differences and problems we have with one source translating it one way,
Right.
and so we run into that a lot. So with Robot here, this is the perfect opportunity for us to ask Robot about the process, because there are undoubtedly a lot of curious people who would be interested in the insight for how that works.
Yeah, well, I mean, my process for the OVA, I transcribed the entire OVA. Basically, I just wrote down the Japanese into like a word processor, and then after like in segments, I would just translate line by line, because I think having the entire context of the conversation first is helpful. In terms of like translations, I think yeah, you do lose a lot of nuance every time. There's just like some things that don't really make a lot of sense. I think Sasha's lines in particular, they have like it's like a nuance that's lost that makes her kind of seem bizarre. I mean, and I don't think her writing in the anime or the OVAs is stellar by any means. They tend to focus on the joke aspect of Sasha and not really on her as a serious person, I think, sometimes. But I would say in particular, there's like this whole subplot with Sasha where she speaks in like polite Japanese, basically, right? That Ymir talks about, I believe, during Utgard.
Right.
And this whole idea of like and during the final part, when she saves the kid, and I think Crunchyroll handled it pretty well, where they basically had her revert back to like a southern accent, or the equivalent of like a southern accent, I believe. Like I thought that was like a pretty nice touch by Crunchyroll, and I think it helped. That's like one of those parts where you can definitely see that Crunchyroll, by working with Kodansha, by working with Isayama, they have like a kind of better grasp on the translation, especially than some of the fan sub translators do. And that's not to like disparage the fan sub translators by any means. I guess I would be including myself, but I think it's just like that was one of those touches that's really hard to convey. Like it's hard to convey formal English or formal language in English without sounding kind of like stuffy or old timey or just completely archaic, which isn't exactly what Sasha is doing. But yeah, overall, I would say, it's like a fairly smooth process. It didn't take too long. It was a fun time.
So, in regards to how we see it on our end, you worked with someone else on the on the subreddit for getting the.
Yes, Chode McJiggletits, my favorite person.
Yep.
Definitely my favorite username.
I made a comment. This was the last thing I said to Stiller about the OVA. I literally quoted Chode McJiggletits. I was like, created by Chode McJiggletits, and I said under that, I was like, this sums up perfectly my feelings about the OVA. And then that's where I ended the conversation. I was like, that's it. That's all.
Yep.
Yeah, great guy though. He does all the confusing stuff for me. I basically just like write stuff down on a Word document and like send it to him. He does all this like minor technical stuff that all this really not minor, but it's like small changes, timing and stuff. So a big shout out to him. But it's a collaborative process. He points out mistakes. I notice mistakes, stuff like that. I think in general the way I translate things tends to probably lean more on like a conversational, like a more liberal translation than like a literal one. So I tend to like emphasize like conversational, like a better rhythm, like things that people might actually say in like an American TV show, or if they're actually conversing with each other, as opposed to like a literal translation of a line. But that's like translators. I guess
Prerogative.
Yeah. I would say that, especially for the OVA, which is mostly conversational without important things, I would do that. I think that line is like a hard one to straddle when you're dealing with a much more plot relevant conversation. Like I imagine the conversations in chapter 46, 47, 48, those are nightmares to translate because for example, I'm trying to think of one that could be, for example, like Bertolt's, there's one line of Bertolt's where I think one of the translations, it's the one where Armin is talking to him and he finally snaps. And I think the manga stream translation, if I'm not mistaken, says like, "You sons of bitches, I swear I'll like exterminate you all," right? And like that's first of all, that's some serious shit you're laying down, Bertolt. Like that's some Eren Yeager level stuff you were saying. But like the original Japanese used this really interesting word, and they basically said it was like, if you translate it literally, it was like a line that would equate to something like calling someone demon spawn, And it's like it's just
God.
like it's like this outdated like English term that doesn't really, there's no real like equivalent to it. So I totally understand why they went with like sons of bitches. I believe the Crunchyroll translation goes with more of like this. I don't think they say demon spawn, but I think they say something that sounds a bit more archaic, a bit more like language that you wouldn't normally use. But it does get across the sort of hatred, I think, that Bertolt has. Like those are the sort of lines that are always really complicated because it reveals so much about a character, but at the same time you don't want to fuck it up, but at the same time you kind of have to fuck it up to get it in English in the first place.
And to get it to make sense.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. But we have to deal with it. It's just something that happens. But I would say that Crunchyroll, they take the longest time, but I would say that they do the best job, in my opinion. That's not to disparage that anything that the current subreddits translation team does. I think given that they're 2 to 3 days faster at worst than Crunchyroll, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, given that they're working much faster on a translation that's been translated basically into 2 different languages, I think they do a really great job getting the idea across. But I would definitely say that if people are reading, want to read up on the manga, that they should read up on both. I would say read it when it comes out, but I would also recommend rereading the Crunchyroll translation which may have some nuances that you missed, and it's going to have the correct names. So
man.
Those names are.
Is that one of the harder things to do?
it's always a guess, because there's a certain style that
Well, I mean, when you look at somebody like Barrick and how that came from Marcel.
Oh, yeah, I think that was just a change that happened later on, right? Yeah, because Barrick or Burrick, whatever that name was, that's what it was when it came out in the magazine. And then when it came out in the volume, it just suddenly changed. And like to this day, we don't really know why. I don't think anyone's really tried to figure it out, but I can't really think of any logistical reason behind it either, you know? I think like the more confusing or interesting one is how people thought it was Billy versus Bure. That was an interesting change. I thought it was going to be Billy too, because that just sounds natural, but I guess it's not. The people at Kodansha, I think they said on their Tumblr that their translators do talk directly with Isayama, so they do get that direct name confirmation. But I mean, it's sometimes you just have to take a guess and think about what sounds right. And I definitely think that in calling him Billy, they like made the right choice. That sounds like the name it would be, and instead they just got completely sideswiped and it was something else. It's definitely an interesting change. Not to mention the Kenny Kaney stuff.
Yeah, that was confusing.
So it happens commonly then.
I would say that it's probably common just because they have to change a name that's not Japanese but written in Japanese. So that phonetic like combination of like consonants and vowels, and they have to translate that into Chinese, and then they have to translate the Chinese back to the English. And just because like Japanese and English are already different enough languages, like the R's and the L's are pretty much undistinguishable in Japanese. That's why like people with Japanese accents, or Asian accents have that R-L difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, that's probably what happened with Billy and Bure. But I mean that aside, it was a great translation. So I mean, it's just those funny details that pop up later.
So I know you also do from time to time some quick translations of like news releases or articles or that type of
Right.
things that come out. Generally speaking, what would you say is like one of like a top three, let's say, things that people should know about translations to sort of temper their expectations?
I think that I think the first thing is that anything that comes through like multiple language transitions is you like always really have to take that with a grain of salt. Like that stuff it's like Japanese is a very contextual language, and things that get pushed through multiple layers of translation it's like difficult to really ascertain what was actually said in a lot of times. Other than that, I think that sometimes translations can come off as pretty wooden, but people are doing the best they can. So, and I think it's better to be accurate than snappy, or it's probably better to have slightly wooden dialogue but actually get the details all across than have something that sounds snappy but could be potentially wrong. So I would say those are the things to like kind of keep in mind. It's like, cut the translators a bit of a break every once in a while.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I remember there's just like some translations where like the translation is slightly wrong, but it just becomes like the mainstream thing. And after a while it's just like, oh no, the damage is done. But I remember like one misconception, I think, was it was chapter 50 and a half, right? With Ymir and Reiner and Bertolt.
Right.
Right. And like the final thing Ymir says is like, so this is what it's like to be a goddess. And I think like because in the Japanese, the word she uses, goddess, is like only used in the context of like a nickname for Krista. But people kind of thought that Ymir actually thought she was referring to herself as a goddess when she was actually like referencing Krista and how Krista is like an altruistic person and saves people,
Right.
and how Ymir did the same thing. And she's like referring to Krista in that line. But I think like there are a lot of people that initially thought like she was referring to herself as a goddess, which definitely makes sense given her name. So it's like, when those sorts of like fan understandings permeate, it can be difficult to like, retract and like get the truth out. But it happens. So
So as far as that goes, the next big question I guess I have is about the dub. Have you been watching the dub?
I've been watching it intermittently because I don't torrent it or anything. It's on TV,
Right, right.
So I've caught some episodes of it, and I think dubs really have a tough job. In a manga, you kind of only have to match for a manga translation. You only have to match the size of the box. In like a fan sub for an anime, you can kind of get around having lines that are a bit too long or a bit too short, or maybe don't break in the right spots, right? Compared to where the characters are speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But in a dub, it's like you have to match everything unless you want to reanimate it. And I think that yeah, the dub translation, I wasn't a huge fan of some of the dub translations. I don't think they did a good job. Some of their lines were, I thought they were pretty corny. I thought they were not interesting, but at the same time, it's like it's what you have to work with. So, and I would say that the writing aside, I think the voice acting is pretty good. I find it agreeable. So I don't really know how. I haven't really been following the critical reaction to that in this subreddit though.
Right. Okay.
Do people like the dub? Are people like,
Mixed
It's
feelings.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of split because some people really don't like the corniness, the cheesiness of how some of the voice actors sound, and
right?
some people kind of don't like some of the line changes either.
Yeah,
But
they did some really like they changed one of like some of the lines one time. Mikasa said like "I am a warrior," and it's like no, you can't use that word. That word has a separate meaning now, and you can't say it.
It's true.
I,
It's like I can imagine like Reiner and Bertolt like freaking out and looking at each other. It's like, is she one of us?
yeah,
It's just.
is it
But
is it possible that they didn't know that when they did that at the time,
I
like when they
think
translated
it's
that?
it's possible, but if it is, then it's like kind of sloppy on their part. But I mean, it is what it is. It can't be changed. But I mean, the anime actually did that once too. I think in Annie's scene in episode 4, she throws Reiner to the ground, and I think in the original, I believe in the original manga, it's like Reiner says, "You're not cut out to be a soldier," and that line is changed in the anime to "You're not cut out to be a warrior."
Hmm.
Hmm.
But I mean, like that line in and of itself, it's not a huge deal, right? Because it was a very minor kind of throwaway line. But it does kind of show sometimes. I think that the
Super
people,
early in the show too.
yeah, they don't. It was a bit of foreshadowing that I think they kind of flubbed on, but
Yeah.
it happens. It wasn't something I think that a lot of people picked up on. Like I knew it happened, but I wasn't, outraged by it. It was a small error, but I mean, I don't really think very highly of the anime overall, but so take my words with a grain of salt, I guess.
Well, there's the other half of the subreddit that actually really does support the quality of the voice actors, and oh, the translating's not that far apart. It's actually like if you look at the anime scenes, they're not too different. So there's kind of a split reaction, I think, in the
Yeah.
subreddit. So
I think for a dub, it's probably better to be more liberal than more liberal, or not be hamstrung to this one-to-one definition of trying to get every sentence right, but trying to like emulate the feel. I
mhm.
think that's what Funimation is going for, and it's going to be hit or miss because there are going to be people, like I guess I'm one of those people where I'm like I wanted this to be like one-to-one to the manga, and now we're going from the anime, which is no longer one-to-one to itself because it's a different language. But it happened.
If I had to point to a specific example of where people are torn, it's got to be Levi, because Levi's lines really polarize people between, man, they changed his dialogue to make him sound like the biggest, toughest, cool guy ever, versus, I'm not even sure what the positive version of that is, where where they say, oh, is it,
Man, he sounds like the toughest, coolest guy ever.
well,
Like just a different
yeah,
spin on the attitude.
I guess that's true, where he sounds appropriate to them, where he sounds,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think they have a hard job. I think anime voice acting in general has found its niche. Like for Japanese voice actors, they have like characters have their niche, and like a sort of like accepted like, oh, this is kind of what protagonists sound like, and this is what cute girls sound like, and this is what tough girls sound like, and like like American like cartoons and acting in general, I think have a bit more range. There's less of like an archetypal voice. So trying to find roles that suit these characters, while in comparison to like the Japanese voices, there's going to be a difference, and sometimes I think that difference is sometimes hard to swallow for like people who have been used to subs or people who are prefer subs, you know. So I mean, I think eventually dubbing is going to get better. Like if you compare dubbing now to dubbing, you know, maybe even 5 years ago, I'm pretty sure it's gotten better. There are some, you know, there are some dubs that stand the test of time, I think, like Bebop, Cowboy Bebop, for example. But there are also a lot of bad dubs out there, and I think in general they've gotten much better.
Yeah, for every bad one, you still have Bebop. Bebop,
Basically.
Bebop, I think is gonna stand forever, probably.
Yeah. Fooly Cooley, FLCL
Right.
had a very good one, I think. But you know, for those two, there's like a bunch more that are just really bad. And nowadays, I think most of the dubs you're getting, it's like the line is split between I don't really like this and I like this, not oh this is utterly atrocious, and I can't listen to this without cringing. So
It seems like for the majority of people, like if you took a majority poll, having a dub that has a split reaction versus one that has a more of a negative reaction is a good sign.
yeah. And I want dubs to continue. I think that dubs bring in more of an audience, which is always
Absolutely.
good, you know, right? For example, like Space Dandy, I think Space Dandy was simulcast both dub and sub, and I think that's brought in a lot of an audience that it might not have normally. So, you know, hopefully we see these kind of things happening more in the future. I mean, anime is still a very Japanese thing, but I can't see like a downside where like a dub, especially the way it's progressing now, is like going to be a downside.
Right. That's definitely the best thing about the dub is that it's the biggest draw in for new viewers, and it brings in the most attention to the stuff that we already have, and like you can bring in people to this world we have where we have all this stuff for them to look at. You
Yeah.
know, so the dub is perfect for that.
So I mean, subtitles are like a huge barrier for people for anything to overcome. You know, like they're great for movies out there that like I haven't watched that most Americans probably haven't seen just because it's in a foreign language and you have to read subtitles. But you know, um, it's like the introductory stuff, I guess. I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of the time we're not gonna have dubs coming out simultaneously with the subs. So I mean, we'll see how that goes though. Yeah.
What was the hardest thing? I mean, I guess you already kind of touched on this previously, but what would you say would be the hardest out of the out of the OVA to translate? Like, what was the hardest part about it?
The hardest part of the OVA? Honestly, I think this OVA had like a lot of really simplistic dialogue.
Oh, really?
So this OVA in particular, yeah. So
Hmm.
I mean, it was kind of mostly a breeze. I would say the hardest segments were probably Shadis's speech, both in the beginning and the end, just
Really?
because those were probably the most dialogue heavy. I think a lot of the other things, it's like it's easy to translate. It's like just coming up with like a line to say. You know, it's like I know
Right.
what Jean means. I just need to come up with a way in English for him to say it without sounding stupid or without sounding outdated. Where it's like with Shadis, I had to like write down all the lines because he tends to talk pretty fast, and I'm not like all too familiar with how to emulate a screaming drill sergeant. So there's
And
that aspect as well.
Right.
right. And also, I found it interesting how you said when you translate line by line, it helps when you see the context the line was in. And thinking like if I were to translate something, of course I only speak one language, but in English, I don't need necessarily to know the context of a line in order to be able to understand it perfectly.
Yeah.
So I don't like so there must be a difference in how some phrases or words translate or have different meanings depending on the context they're in Japanese.
Yeah, I think Japanese is a pretty contextual language. Japanese is considered a hard language for Americans to learn. Um, I kind of understand why. There's like a lot of it has to do with tone, like the tone in which things are presented. There's just Japanese in general has this thing where the tone in which something is delivered can mean more than the actual words. It's like you know how sometimes you might like throw around swear words with your friends because you're friends. Like if you call your friend a little shit, you're not you don't mean that in like an aggressive way, right? But you could also say it in an aggressive way. It's like Japanese is like that, but I think with like a wider variety of phrases. So something that's not aggressive when said normally might be a lot more aggressive, and I would have to translate that pretty differently because there's no like one phrase that you can use in English for. There's not like one phrase where it's like it comes out nicely in one context and mean in the other. You kind of have to come up with separate lines for those two things. So I think that's kind of the difficulty with translating from Japanese to English, especially when sentence structures can be so different and stuff. But even then, I think finding the context of a line and finding the right way to deliver it is probably the most important thing.
Very interesting.
What would you say is the hardest type of thing? Like, what's something someone can say in a line of dialogue that's the hardest to try and translate?
I think the hardest...
Is it just context-based, or can someone... Is there like
the hardest type of line would definitely be like, for example, anything that Annie says, right? Or a lot of things that Bertolt and Reiner say. Like, conversational dialogue is all fine and dandy because you can just, you have conversations with people every day. You know, like what kind of phrases people say, what kind of I have like probably a decent understanding of how teenagers talk to each other, whereas like for example, the lines that Annie says in Stoas to each of those characters, to Mikasa, to Eren, to Armin, each one of those is like loaded with subtext and stuff like that it's like it's hard. You have to find a way to capture that feeling and communicate it clearly. So I would say that, I mean, it's kind of like saying, oh, hard lines are hard to translate, but definitely it's definitely these things with a lot of subtext, or like when people are speaking in like code, like when Ymir and Bertolt and Reiner are like speaking around certain subjects. That's definitely a hard. You have to like look at the entire conversation, think what are they trying to say. Like I think another thing, you know how people made a big deal about what Eren wrote when he was in the Titan form back around.
That was a big one. Yeah.
It's just because the sentence structure is different in Japanese, and that's like I still don't know if the way it was translated is really the right way. We won't really know until that sentence is filled in. So, I mean, all we can do is wait and see. Yep.
I think the thing most tragic about that is that there being so much subtext and there being such difficulty to some of the lines about talking around subjects or some of Annie's lines or anything like you say like that, is that it opens the door to the possibility of different interpretations.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that the Japanese SNK community, if they exist, which I'm sure they do, they might, have completely different understandings of certain lines that we may have missed out on.
And how crazy is that? How crazy is that to think that these different interpretations can totally change the way we understand these characters?
I think Japan in general tends to be, or most of the time warping stuff I've seen, I think originated from Japan. I think they tend to be more into that kind of thing, but we'll see. It's pretty crazy, and it's possible that we have some character interpretations that like wildly vary from what they have because of one thing. Like I feel like the characters that you might see that are going to have like the most different potentially would be characters like Annie, where we're basing this off of like several lines of dialogue, and we're just extrapolating like sentences upon sentences of like thoughts.
Yeah. That's crazy. That, man, these characters could be totally different. Like it could be backwards in our interpretations. That's insane. Okay, so
you wanna do the visual novel?
Yeah, I think we're gonna move into that now since I think we're out of translation questions.
We could actually break this into like 3 different Abberant podcasts. I'm pretty sure. we could do OVA translation stuff and Annie.
We really could.
Honestly.
So like, we should probably do like a little intro for people that don't even know what we're talking about.
Right. So, Scott, how familiar are you with the visual novel?
Uh, I have not read or known of its existence before this podcast.
So, this is the perfect introduction for you then. Um, on the YouTube video, there will be a link to Plain Dude's Tumblr page where Robot, I assume that's the one you're working with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There will be a link to that on the YouTube description for people to read. And what we're going to talk about right now is the visual novel for Annie's
Yes.
character. That's
A a bonus from Blu-ray Volume 6, I believe.
right. We're gonna start talking about the spoilers for that. So I would pause the video and go read that, and then come back to listen to us talk about it. And it was based the day before the expedition, the 57th expedition, that involved her investigating a mystery, which ended up disclosing some character details about her through flashbacks, and also painted some interesting images through this girl that she was pursuing, because they were implying some similarities to her Annie, I mean, and her dad.
Okay. Should we do like a little summary of this, or?
I'd appreciate that.
All right.
So yeah, so
I don't really remember the plot details too well.
So Scotty can get in on the context of this. It starts off with Hitch and Annie basically in their, I don't want to call it a dorm room, but they're military police like headquarters, barracks, whatever you want to call it, where Annie comes in and says that she needs the day off for the expedition day so she can go and do her thing during the expedition. And Hitch says that's fine, but what do you need off for, right? And Annie basically tells her, if I remember correctly, that it's basically none of her business.
Yeah.
And Hitch says, all right, fine, well then you owe me this favor. You got to do this thing for me. Take this job for me. And Annie asks her about it. She gets the details about it. There was a girl who went missing in Walrose, Maria, something like that. There was a girl who went missing, and the contract was put out by her dad for the military police to send somebody to go and investigate, to try and figure out what happened. And basically, from that point, it's mostly Annie going around digging up clues and running a proper investigation on what happened. And we find out a lot of details about this girl that she's pursuing. Eventually, I'm not sure which point I want to jump to. Eventually, they get to a scene where Annie has tracked down a lead to a couple of guys who are looking for the girl that Annie's looking for. And she pursues them, and she gets into a conflict with them, and they shoot her.
Oh wow.
The two guys shot Annie with a rifle, I believe, and the bullet went right through her and into a wall. And and she regenerated from it, got information from the guys by beating them up and stuff. And this is all just off the top of my head, by the way. It's just some stuff I'm probably missing or leaving out.
I mean, I think that the details of the mission and stuff like that. Well, I think there's basically three types of like interesting things we can mine from the visual novel. There's one is Annie's flashbacks, which she has multiple, I think, during the story.
Right.
There's like some like weird / interesting world building details in there, I think. And then the final is like the final segment, I guess. Probably the weakest is like the comparisons between Annie and her father and the girl and yeah, she wants to find in her father. Did you finish your summary? There's a bit more, I think.
We're getting close to the end of it, because after she gets that information out of those guys, she basically goes and finds the girl, and then from there, once she finds the girl, she finds out that the girl was basically getting away from her father because her father wanted her to do a thing, if I remember correctly. And Annie went back to the father of the girl and basically said she couldn't find her, or she couldn't bring her home, or something along those lines. And the father basically outright told her, well, I know you're protecting her. and they played that last scene where Annie was talking to the girl's father, and that was one of the more interesting scenes, I think, where they were trying to draw some parallels between Annie and her father. But that was about the end of it, where she left after talking to the girl's father, went home, and had her last flashback before she went to sleep, which was the end of the visual novel before the expedition the next day.
I think a point of like clarification that we need to make is that we don't really know how this fits into the canon of anything at all. Isayama supervised the visual novel, which could mean anything from he looked at the rough draft once and decided it was okay, maybe he was really involved in the writing process. We don't know if it's anime canon or manga canon, and it could be anything in between. So, I wouldn't say that anything in this visual novel could be used as like explicit proof, but we still think it's worth discussing. So.
And we both sort of agreed, looking at the character details and the dialogue, that it fits well enough that it seems like it's probably at least anime canon.
And could very well fit into the manga canon.
It could very well. And on top of that, my summary was off the top of my head, which was based off of another summary.
Yes.
Which means that the actual visual novel definitely has more details that probably didn't make it into the summary. Maybe it just wasn't interesting. Maybe whatever. Right?
Yep. All right. So, I guess we can get some of the more interesting details out of the way. There are universities inside the walls. So there's that's not like we don't really get to know what life is like inside the walls because all of our characters are soldiers. So that was an interesting touch that the daughter is actually majored in chemistry at a university. So
she
yes.
was in the visual novel she was creating, I guess it was meant to be some sort of drug.
Yeah, it actually says that they created codeine basically, so like codeine syrup,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it's just like a filler name, but plain dude used codeine, so I imagine that I trust that translation. I think they actually did say codeine.
Mm-hmm.
The girl, her name is Carly. She majored in chemistry, and she basically she wanted to help her father, I think, and she began mass producing this, and she's told him to only sell it to clients from the inner walls, but he started selling it to everybody in town, even inside the outer walls, and she didn't want that to happen because she thinks because it's dangerous and she doesn't want it to spread in the outer walls, but she thinks it's okay for people in the inner walls that like know the risks better and are basically more well informed about the drug.
Her father ran a business. He ran basically a supply business where he was taking the stuff that she was making and she was selling it to all kinds of different clients. And originally she was only wanting to do a small amount to help people, or to only give it to people who really need it and stuff. And he ended up making such a profit on it that he actually was selling it pretty well, and that led to him getting her to mass produce the stuff.
Right. So it's like an almost Breaking Bad-esque. Almost.
Weird.
Yeah, it's a pretty strange story. It's a very like a modern story for the kind of anachronistic sort of tale that SNK is. But
if you're gonna make a Sherlock out of a character, I like that it was Annie.
yes. So there are some interesting side details like that. Chemistry majors, that's a thing. Universities.
Universities are a
Yeah,
thing.
universities are so interesting to me, especially like, putting Annie aside for a second. Like just the implications of the CMP's
allowing that.
Their entire goal is to put an end to any technological advancements that may help defeat or defend themselves against the powers that be. It's like, how can you possibly have, like, okay, chemistry, one thing that's already devastating towards building weapons eventually that may be able to be potent enough to cause harm. But then you have to think chemistry is obviously not the only subject. So eventually, if you continuously enrich your culture or your society with knowledge, there's going to be a tipping point where not even the CMPs can put an end to the mass, I don't want to say production, but I'm lacking a better word, the mass production of knowledge towards the society. And then at that point, it's like, what do you do?
Yeah.
You have to advance with the times.
It's probably what's happening is that the Central Military Police probably they definitely control, right? They control what's being taught. I mean, I can't imagine any other situation. Otherwise, it's just stupid of them. And
Right.
they did away with Irwin's father, who was just a teacher at a small school, right? So I imagine they limit the flow of information very severely to limit that sort of thing. But
But
it still feels weird.
yeah,
I acknowledge that it still feels very strange.
because at
That
the same time, like, you can't teach flawed math or chemistry because the numbers won't add up. Like you can only you can only stop and control the information to a certain degree because you can't outright lie about it like you can history. History is malleable, you know. The victor chooses what the history is written about and what is written about history. But like you can't choose what's written about math or chemistry or sciences which really drive technology.
Not to
So,
mention, the codeine drug that she like manufactured is supposedly a new drug. So they teach their students well enough for one girl to basically manufacture a new, highly addictive drug on her own.
In
And
yeah.
large quantities.
So
so,
it really adds to the question, which obviously we'll never be able to know, but it's like had this coup of the Scout Legion not occurred, would there have been a point in time in which there would have been a big enough surge in knowledge where the CMPs would have had to take drastic measures,
Yeah,
or
I would
it would
think
have
so.
gotten completely
yeah,
out of control?
like cultural revolution, like USSR,
Yeah,
kind of like brain drain kind of situations.
Right.
exactly. Yeah,
It's possible. There's those historical events have too much nuance and context and subtext for us to really possibly compare them to what we have
Right.
in SNK, right? But
yeah.
I think the more interesting part of that is that like these details make the visual novels seem like it's not canon. Like
I was about to say,
they add this sort of realism to the entire thing that's like are you or not realism. I guess they add these like realistic details that really don't overall add up to I think what we the
like, not to
image of what
say,
we have.
yeah, not to say that SNK isn't deep, but this is like a whole nother level of like deep.
It's like
Like,
SNK kind of like glosses over these details mainly by not mentioning them and like just being like, yeah,
Yeah,
the
don't worry about it.
situation
Don't worry
it's
about it.
exactly.
handled. And
Because
in
at the end of the
comparison,
day, an anime is an anime, and you can't counteract every single logical point that could potentially occur. So what you have to do is just ignore it, which is exactly what you said. So the fact that they brought that up within this novel, visual novel, kind of makes me think it's not totally canon. But that's just my opinion.
In the grander scheme of things, I don't think that detail was super important
right? I
overall.
feel like it was probably a throwaway detail that they included that we're like expounding upon for
Because they
uh,
needed basically it was there because they needed to make the plot revolving around the Carly girl make sense. You
I
know,
right.
see.
because
Yeah,
they
yeah.
wanted to give her character detail. They wanted to make this teenage chem wizard make sense within the plot of this visual novel.
They can move the clouds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But moving on from the chemistry point, another interesting thing that I'm reading, or read rather, Annie actually uses her, actually shifts at one point
Yeah,
to
yeah, I totally
to
forgot about that.
Really?
she's handcuffed and she shifts just her hands.
That's what I was saying before. Okay, this is. I was asking this question before. It was kind of like in jest, though, in a different podcast. I think you remember Stiller and Robot if you listened to the podcast previous. I don't know if you did. I was like, and then Andy will transform her hand and crush
Yeah,
whoever
I think
releases
it
her.
was Hitch. I think it was Hitch.
And then I think it was either you or Zach who said, I don't think she can just transform a single part of her body. And I was thinking maybe, I mean,
Why
I don't
not?
know. Yeah, why not?
Aaron
Eh,
kind of did it once.
Right when he grabbed the
Bertolt
spoon.
Bertolt also expresses or is able to kind of like modify his Titan form to the situation, where he basically transforms into his torso and like a bunch of
Oh yeah, on
spikes,
the wall.
and then
Yeah.
latches on. So yeah, I guess this isn't really confirmation, but it's like another small piece of secondary tier maybe evidence that you might be able to point to say that yeah, partial shifting is possible. So yep, that happened.
Yep.
Yes.
Wow.
And he's showing off the big guns there.
And he's straight up regenerating and
She got she literally had a hole blown in her from probably at least close proximity rifle,
yeah.
and was just like meh, you know.
It says
Th-
she was shot with a pistol, but the pistol was he was either close enough or the pistol was powerful enough to pierce her body,
Yeah.
and the
Oh
bullet
god.
hit the wall.
So it was a
And
pistol, not a rifle.
but it must have been like a freaking intense pistol,
Intense, like a 50 cal, like a
Desert Eagle.
mag. Yeah,
Yeah,
Desert
it's a
Eagle.
deagle.
But I mean, this puts me on to another kind of tangent. I'm sorry to go on these, but it's like it's, I don't really whenever I think of Titans, I don't necessarily think of the shifters being superhuman, but they are. I mean, if you have the power to regenerate literally limbs, and you have the power to get mortally wounded, like half your body chopped off, but if you bite your finger, completely you become a Titan, and then if you shift back immediately, which we've seen Annie and some others have the ability to do, they can shift in and out multiple times out of their Titan form. She could be like, oh, you shot my body in half, bite, transform, de-transform, now I have all my body parts. It's
Aaron
like,
did this. Aaron regenerated an entire arm and an entire leg. So yeah,
yeah. So it's like, not only that, but we already know that Ymir, I think, yeah, I believe it was 80 years she was in her Titan form. And when she got out of it, when she ate Reiner and Bertolt's friend, that she was the same age as when she transformed. Now the implications there are either that when you're in your Titan form,
you don't age
you
physically.
don't age, or is it that when you're a shifter, you don't age? Because
I think that Bertolt and Reiner have to have aged in
that's
Annie
true. That's
because
true.
they wouldn't because they were well, I know the anime is not manga canon, but the anime does have one shot where you actually see Bertolt and Reiner as 9-year-olds with the refugees, and you also see Annie as 9-year-olds in as refugees in episode 2.
Okay.
And even that aside, I imagine that it would be pretty weird if Reiner and Bertolt didn't grow at all.
That's true. That would be
So
someone would take notice.
so I believe that it's like if you stay in your shifter form that you do not age. So
I I
I believe
wonder.
that's the corollary.
Yeah, that's interesting. Man,
Yes.
there's a
Another
lot to think about.
slight throwaway line of dialogue, I guess, or not dialogue, but it says that Annie needs to concentrate she needs to concentrate on regenerating,
I
which
yeah, I
kind
think
of kind of confirms what we already know. Aaron was kind of unable to regenerate his limbs,
mhm.
so I think it shows that Aaron can regenerate, but he's not as good at it or as controlled or as focused at it
Right.
as
I think
Annie.
the other implication here is that the level of focus and concentration required depends on how serious the wound is. Because it's like saying, for instance, when her eyes were stabbed out when she was fighting Levi, that took a good minute, right?
It
Yeah,
took
for one
30
eye.
30 seconds.
For one eye. And in this situation,
Oh, right, yeah.
she had a hole blown in her, and I don't know if it actually said how long it took, but it took longer, I believe,
Well,
because
It says
the
she still
way
needs some time for the wound to close up completely, but
yeah,
it stopped bleeding.
so she managed to stop. She managed to get it to stop bleeding, but
corduroy,
yeah, but couldn't completely uh, close it up.
So
It,
it
it took
basically just
longer. So it
yeah, it's another piece of sort of like shifter expertise that you need.
right.
And it's another thing that I think probably Reiner, Bertolt, and Annie are, or well, I wouldn't even say that. I would say Annie definitely shows a marked proficiency for. So, yes. It's pretty interesting how Annie is shows like the widest breadth of like abilities in a lot of ways. She regenerates. She can on shift call Titans over, reshift, heal, crystallize, which kind of makes sense given how it seems like she was the most intensely trained in comparison to where Bertold and Reiner maybe didn't even have that much training. It also fits kind of that, well, it's not really proof, but basically all of Reiner's skills hand to hand appear to be just have been taught to him in the Scouting Legion. So there's that. Yeah. Okay.
And should have traded him.
Well, I feel like there may be a reason why she did it, but we shall see. We don't know. All right. Should we move on to the flashbacks, or do you want to? Did you have something else?
There were two other interesting bits that I noticed from the dialogue that I thought were interesting. The first was that when she originally got into the fight with the two guys who were looking for Carly, they had actually captured her and were taking her to someone. I can't remember who. But when they took her ring too. They removed her ring, and she got really antsy about getting that ring back.
Yeah.
As if that ring had a real strong significance to her, you know?
Isn't that the same ring that she used to
it's the
poke
very
herself?
same ring. Very same ring.
It
So
does kind of
maybe-
go back to the thing where I think there's like a thread. It's like, why don't shifters just bite their tongue? Probably should have been able to bite her tongue. Or she could have gotten a tongue ring, which would be a gross, disgusting way to do it, but she could just rip it off with her teeth, I imagine.
That's true. I thought that was interesting that they placed a lot of significance not on that the ring was her tool for shifting, but that it was.
But the ring itself,
but
yeah.
the ring was significant to her.
I imagine it's probably something her father gave her, but
Yeah. Or
I mean,
I'm curious about her mother.
yes. Oh man,
Because if you're gonna get a ring, you would assume it would come from the mother. You wouldn't think the father would give her the ring.
Miss Leonhardt is like, we haven't even touched that that potential.
There are so many mysteries about her dad that her mother doesn't even fit into the equation.
Yes.
One other bit of throwaway dialogue that I thought was fun was when she shifted to break out of her restraints, and she stopped her bleeding, and she beat those two dudes up. When it happened, they said, "Holy shit, you're a Titan. You turned into a Titan temporarily." And towards the end of it, she apparently beat them up so bad that they kind of didn't realize it, because
Holy crap. So like she basically concussed them extremely badly, something like that.
well, the exact dialogue that I'm looking at says, "It's not your fault. What did you do just now? What are you?" And Annie said, "You just said it. I'm a Titan." And he said, "That was just a metaphor." And she goes, "Oh, of course." Of course it was
Oh
just a
my
metaphor.
god. If it turns out that Annie has like mini mind wipe powers,
Oh no.
oh no. Oh no. I hope it's
when
I
I
hope
read
it's more
that,
like Annie just being clever, but
when I read that, I just assumed that she was just, covering her own ass in the case that these guys might blow her cover,
I think so too, but I think there's also a certain level of like nonchalance or like to Annie. Like this is separate dialogue, but basically Hitch kind of thinks that Annie's business is that she's gonna go see a guy, which is true. She's gonna go see Aaron, but so she says like, what kind of person is he? Your business. You're meeting a guy. What kind? And Annie straight up says a 15-meter Titan.
Yeah. I forgot about that line too.
So it's like, that's like, oh, I don't know. So yeah, Hitch is just like, wow, shitty joke.
I'm just not even sure if that's. I'm not sure about that line coming from Annie. I really don't know.
I could imagine her saying it in like a complete utter deadpan maybe, but yeah.
I'm not familiar with Annie Deadpan.
I imagine that's like the only humor she knows. I don't think she tells real jokes.
I'm not even sure it's like I'm not even sure she's trying to make a joke out of it. It seems like she was legitimately surprised when they said that they were just making a metaphor, or they were just, not being serious when they accused her of being a Titan. I thought
that makes sense.
I thought she before they said that actually accepted that they saw that she was a Titan and just just proceeded to beat the living shit out of them. Until until they forgot.
But that's so like, I don't want to say anime like, but it's just like, oh, I'm just gonna beat you up until you forget. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like,
Laser guided amnesia, yeah, you know.
yeah, it's like, so you didn't just break out those handcuffs? Like, I just concussed my way out of that knowledge.
Mm.
Like, I mean, I buy it. It's just,
It might be another one of those things where maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't super important to the visual novel, or maybe
And just like lost in summarization.
yeah, that could be it too.
Or lost in translation and summarization.
It's really not totally clear, because again, like you mentioned, it's coming through like 3 or 4 different avenues of, travel getting to us.
Yeah.
yeah.
You want to move on to the flashbacks, which are probably the
Right, and we
the
should
meat of
definitely.
this. All right. So there's one that's like, it's basically her describing her training. It's not so much of a specific scene flashback as it is like an overall looking back on the experience sort of deal. I think the most interesting stuff with this is like this contrast between like some people think that the shifters have like this kind of militaristic society, or like a warrior kind of, maybe a tribal mentality, where these kids have to prove themselves. And I think there's both evidence to support and kind of disconfirm that line of thinking. Her father has this very high, he really drills into her this sort of carry out your mission. Your mission is your purpose in life. This is extremely important, and he kind of drills that into her. And that definitely, I think, goes in line with that sort of tribal militaristic sort of you need to prove yourself. This is how you prove yourself mentality. But on the other hand, there's also this scene, and this also happened in the manga, but this scene where it's like, I want you to come back home. It's okay to abandon everything. Those two things kind of really clash, because if she fails, she can't come back, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea that a lot of people have, that if they fail, they cannot come back. But Annie's father is like, you can come back. I will always be there. So either Annie's father believes that if Annie fails and comes back, he'll still be able to evade these people, if they are this sort of militaristic tribal society that, like, people think that some of the reasons that why Reiner and Bertolt are kind of tentative about returning home is that they will be killed if they fail. And I guess Annie and her father believe that Annie's father believes that he can avoid that fate for her even if she fails. So I was just wondering what you guys thought about that.
I'm looking at it more individually based, but the visual novel really hammered the point home and confirmed one of the points in the manga where Annie had a throwaway line about her father, where she said he was super idealistic, and it drove her crazy how idealistic her father was about his aspirations and his goals. One of the flashbacks really did hammer that home, where it talked about how she had trained super hard with him.
It makes the mission, like, it's hard. For me, it's the way Annie's father speaks about it. It's like the aspirations aspect kind of makes me feel like these missions are important, not in just like a proving yourself way, but they're like legitimately important. Like maybe on a societal level, not just a personal one.
Looking at it, the way they paint it, he worked her day and night for years, constantly draining her with this training and instilling in her the same kind of ideologies that he has, and the same kind of the obedience that he wants her to have towards this mission. And my instinct and the implication that I draw from this is that the scene of him telling her that she needs to come home, that he wants her to come home, to abandon the mission practically, is him saying, well, I mean, he did actually say in the anime, he said, I was wrong.
Right.
So
I mean, I think that's also in the manga as well. But
yeah, right.
This I was wrong scene. That scene's like still something we don't really know the meaning of to this day. For like 2 years we don't know what it means.
If his ideology was
Is
wrong,
it the ideology that's wrong? I mean, I would assume so, but there's no, guarantee that that's what it is.
yeah, it's the ideology. Maybe it's the mission. Maybe
Maybe it's the training. In the manga, he's like, I won't say for you to forgive me now. So it's like maybe he feels this guilt over this extreme training that he's pushed her through.
and whatever importance this mission has for her, it's a great deal of pressure, and he knew that at the time.
Yeah.
And
I
he
mean,
knew that she would eventually know that too. He had to have known at that point that she would have grown up knowing that this mission is bullshit.
it's either bullshit or extremely difficult, like a long shot, like this is our last hope kind of deal.
Well, the thing about that is that the visual novel seems to say that Annie doesn't actually know what the reasoning is for what she's supposed to be doing.
Yes, that was very interesting. I mean, Plain Dude notes that like she doesn't understand the purpose or the meaning.
And
That
that's huge.
she probably understands the reasoning behind it, but she doesn't understand the purpose or meaning. It's like with that added context, it's like what kind of mission could it be?
One that you would send her on. You give her autonomy in this mission. You don't tell her what it's for, and you put a bunch of guidelines and like strict rules for her to follow, and she has to stick to it, or else she faces some sort of possible punishment from her people, like you mentioned earlier.
I think one of the like it's either that or it's like it says that or Plain Dude says that she understands the reasoning behind the mission. She doesn't understand the purpose. So it's possible that she looks at it as this sort of like there's no way we're going to succeed. That's also one element of looking at it. I don't necessarily think it's this sort of suicide mission thing explicitly, but or not that like they're sent to fail, but it's like we have to send you out, and it's like I'm sorry that our chances of succeeding are this low, but we have to do it. Like we have no other choice.
It seemed
That kind of. Oh, sorry.
it seemed like the final flashback implied that despite not totally understanding what was going on with the reasoning for that mission, that she was still committed enough, despite not understanding it, that she was going to continue to do it anyway, despite what damage that was going to do to her over time.
And that completely, in my mind, like reaffirms the position that her mission was to get the coordinate power. Because if you think about it, she understood the reasoning behind what she needed to do. And then it was a long shot because she didn't know who had the power, how that person may not even know that they have the power, So what do you have to do? You have to get inside the walls, you have to infiltrate it, you have to somehow find that person, all of these factors, then you have to retrieve it. It's such a long shot. And what is the purpose behind the coordinate power? Maybe she wasn't told that in the context of the mission. So it kind of fits all the pieces of the puzzle when you fit in and you make the assumption that her mission was to get the coordinate. It kind of fits, in my opinion.
I think it's like you have to get the coordinate, and if you don't get the coordinate, like all our people will die, or like all our people cannot be saved.
And then she wasn't told why that would be the case.
She wasn't told why, but she's basically saying if you don't get the coordinate power, we're all screwed.
Exactly.
And then at
that
that
makes
moment,
sense.
at that moment when she realizes that, or when she was told that, then you play the dialogue from her dad saying, "I don't even care. Just come home. Just make it home."
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is this combination of this understanding that Annie is like weirdly selfish and like both selfish and selfless. Her father goes from being this like I think like her father wants to save his people, right? I assume this is like the whole point. For now, that's our working hypothesis. And then it's like, but he can't do it, so he has to basically taskmaster his daughter to do it. And at the very end, he realizes I don't want my daughter to die like this. I don't want to send her off to her death because
after spending her entire life beating her into the ground with training, yeah.
I imagine that like he wouldn't say the things that he said if he thinks the mission is an easy mission, that he thinks it's going to be safe, that So I imagine it's like a mission that's extremely difficult. There's no guaranteed chance of survival, and he realizes at the very end, he's like, "I'm sorry, Annie, I can't keep you here anymore. I have to let you go, but I'm sorry I put you through all this, and I want you to know that, I want you to come home, that I love you." And that makes sense because and in a lot of ways, I think it's a betray. In the way Annie talks about her father with some scorn, I think it's that they kind of switched positions, where initially she kind of didn't care, but now she's dedicated to this mission, in on a certain sense. And we kind of get that with her dialogue.
Yeah, okay, I see that.
I won't let anyone interfere. Um, I think she's torn between this like selfishness and this
Selflessness.
Maybe not selflessness. The mission. She wants to complete the mission, right? But she also wants to survive.
I think both of those points are right, because you could make an argument that she's selfish and selflessness based on the conversation she had with Marlowe, because there's a moment where she says, "Yeah, I am a horrible person, but at the same time, there's a right way to go about this."
I mean, I think that like the thing where she talks about her father in that little flashback scene with Eren where they're training, and then the way she talks about Eren, or the way it's implied that she's talking about Eren, that she admires these people with aspirations. And the scorn towards her father kind of implies she basically said, "My father used to be this kind of person, but he's not anymore." And she kind of resents him for, I guess, no longer being this idealistic person. And that's always been like a very like complex point, that she appears herself to not be an idealistic person, but she admires idealistic people, like the person her father was, like the person that Eren is. That's always been like it's a very like complicated like duality that she holds inside of her.
And then just painting the image of as far as we know, Annie's an only child. So the image of her dad setting her down when she's like 9 years old and telling her all this, knowing that he's sending her away for, like, I don't know, potentially forever, never seeing her again. That's a tearjerker, man.
It's pretty painful, and I think when you consider the fact that Annie doesn't. It's possible that Annie wasn't involved in the original kicking down the wall Maria, and she wasn't with Marcel. She wasn't with Reiner and Marcel and Bertolt when Ymir ate Marcel. So like I think there's even a slight implication that she may have made her way there alone. The anime even makes its point of separating Reiner and Bertolt when they do show up in episode 2. Reiner and Bertolt show up as a pair. Annie shows up alone. That's like even worse. Just like sending your 9-year-old kid off alone, especially with the fact that they don't come from the same village. I mean, if Reiner and Bertolt were around, I imagine that they would have been trained similarly to the way Annie was. I can't think of a reason why they wouldn't. So
it makes you think, because she wasn't sent with them, did she maybe have a different mission? Or
I always consider that, especially when you think about the fact, sorry to cut you off, but like when you think about the fact that the expedition, she's kind of acting on her own. They're obviously all working to get Eren, but if you think about it, there had to have been like a more consistent way to capture Eren where all three of them worked together. Or specifically, Reiner and Annie could have worked together in a much more coordinated way
would have made it much easier, because the expedition really didn't go well.
Like, there's a scene, I think. I mean, I kind of subscribe to this weird theory where Bertolt is kind of very wary of Annie, and Annie is equally wary of Bertolt. But there's a scene where they scream, and Annie screams, right? And you see everyone's reactions, and Reiner is like sweating, and Bertolt just doesn't care. And it's like, it almost makes me wonder if like they kind of agreed to go their separate ways. That like we'll assist you if necessary, but we're not going to compromise your position. And if you're going to go do your own thing, then you go do your own thing.
One of my theories on that, and this is kind of out there, is that maybe in this village where they come from, there's not necessarily a competition, but it's very like you want to get recognized. Maybe there's limited resources, maybe each of them have their own families that they want to protect, and maybe they're being ostracized from the community because there's not enough protection or something of that nature. So potentially Annie and Bertolda Reiner, they might be going after the same, you know, the
As a
same
competition.
coordinate. Not necessarily as a competition, but as a means of like, here, I got this, so therefore my family is more valued in the community. Therefore, we should stay. So if it comes down to who should get kicked out because of a lack of something, we won't be that person or we won't be that family. So it's a matter of survival in a sense. Like, look, we might be going after the same thing, but at the end of the day, I'm after my hide, you're after, your hide. So we know that we're on the same team, but we're also looking out for number one and not
Okay.
everybody.
I don't think this is necessarily like a piece of evidence that supports that. I don't think there's like a lot of evidence to specifically support that. I'm not saying that it can't happen, and I think it's definitely a plausible situation. But one thing we know with Reiner and Bertolt was that their initial mission was to kill everybody inside the wall. That's what they said, and that's what they set out to do. And that's not what Annie apparently set out to do here. So
Right.
that's another kind of weird information asymmetry between the trio that like it's that maybe Reiner and Bertolt don't have as much information as Annie does.
Well,
Or well, they are aware of the coordinate, but they believe that the best way to solve their situation, whatever it is, was to murder everybody first.
But
okay, but
we do
it,
know that they're sharing some information.
Yeah, they
right.
are.
But to go back to your point, an interesting theory. I mean, I'm not trying to totally defend my point, but to get back at, they may have had different missions. Another thing is they could have had the same mission to get the coordinate, but they went about it different ways. And Bertold and Reiner's way, they think, okay, so if we kill everybody in the inner walls, the person who has the coordinate power, they can't possibly die. They'll just shift. And then once they shift, boom, we got them. That's the coordinate. So maybe their idea all along was to make Aaron or, whoever had the coordinate die, and then they would reveal themselves to have the power to shift.
I think you're on something in terms of maybe not Aaron, but they kind of want to draw out the coordinate. But I think it's probably
Exactly.
more likely that they think the coordinate is someone like inside, maybe working with the government or working inside the inner walls. I don't think they expect a random kid in
Very
their like
true.
training group to be in to be a coordinate. I think that's why the goal is to like kill all of humanity. They're eventually going to corner humanity to the point where the shifter cannot the coordinate cannot stay quiet and he
Exactly.
needs to show up. So because I think when they capture Aaron, I think the capture of Aaron for Reiner and Bertolt and Annie represents a separate possibility, potentially, than the coordinate power, because they think that Aaron might have the coordinate power, but Aaron is unique enough on his own, just being like a, I guess, a quote unquote synthetic Titan, that maybe just that possibility also presents a solution for them. Because I mean, Reiner himself admits that like Aaron having the coordinate was like the worst possible combination, and
Yep.
they had to have foreseen that possibly happening from the second he became a Titan. So I definitely think they were always continually, looking for other avenues, especially because Monkey Trouble. It's possible that they think Monkey Trouble might have been the coordinate from inside the walls, although I think that's pretty unlikely because of where Monkey Trouble showed up. But
Right.
it's like something worth thinking about, I think. Definitely this sort of difference in methodology. And to be certain, Reiner and Bertolt are much more suited to their plan than Annie is. Like Annie is good at this sort of one-on-one sort of extraction type of stuff. And Reiner and Bertolt are better as a team, like, causing massive destruction. So that does.
Also, yeah, if they wanted to work together, you could think, okay, Reiner Bertolt, you guys find who the coordinate is, because you're good at destroying and causing mayhem with bringing down the walls and letting the Titans in. And then Annie is the extractor. She's the person who's quick, who's agile, who can get in and out. So
Yes.
once you know who the coordinate is, boom, Annie, you're up. Now you gotta get that coordinate. So it's like a tag team sort of deal.
In a really weird way, Annie is like supremely well suited to this role. I actually think Annie might have had a better job or had a better chance convincing Aaron to come with him if she like hadn't shifted, but like presented herself to Aaron as an ally. I
Definitely.
feel like that's definitely a possibility at this point, where like
Definitely better than Berthold and Reiner doing it.
Yeah, I mean,
If
because Annie and Aaron have this like connection. They have this understanding with each other, and I feel like there was a conversation that could have been had that it's unfortunate that it didn't
I
happen.
feel like if that conversation is going to happen when she returns.
I do too. I want it to happen. I need it to happen.
I don't think that'll be anytime soon, but that conversation I think is going to come down the road.
little
Yeah.
do you know, next
It'll
chapter.
it'll be short and like it won't be a long conversation. I think it'll be just a quick, couple of lines where they're really able to express sort of what they're both thinking.
Yeah. That relation, the Aaron and Annie's like connection relationship is just a really weird one in the scale of SNK because it's like, I mean, Aaron's not like a friend kind of guy. Like even we know Aaron and Armin are friends, but like, and we know that he's good friends with Mikasa, but it seems like on a social level, the person he interacts with like the most readily kind of in the manga, it might actually be Annie. And for on Annie's side, it's definitely Aaron. So it's like this kind of like unexplored.
You think so? I think
What the hell
isn't
was that line about in the manga where she was training with Aaron and she told him, "I need you to learn how to talk to girls."
Well, it's clear that Aaron hasn't learned how to talk to girls because the next time he talked to Krista, he made her all sad and shit.
Yeah.
He was like, "Oh, Krista, Historia, your Krista disguise, it sucked. I saw right through it." And she's like, "Oh."
damn.
That
Damn,
that
burned,
line
burned.
coming from Annie though. It's
Yeah.
weird.
It is weird. I feel like in terms of optimal strategy, it might have been better if Annie went into the scouting legion with Aaron, and the others had
Yeah.
stayed behind the military police.
Yeah.
You know?
But then again, isn't it kind of more cover to think like, oh, I'm not even in the same group as you. How could I possibly be a suspect in who's the Titan shifter?
True. But I
It's
think
kind
in a certain sense, they kind of should have been like focused all their resources on this one mission. Like they shouldn't have thought of it in this terms of like, oh, we can go out multiple times as the female Titan or the armored Titan and try to get Aaron like every expedition. It's like this is like a one-time only deal.
right.
But
And
but
in terms of Andy's relationship with other people, I think the most interesting relationship is her and Armin. I feel like that's super interesting in what they had going on, like kind of mutual agreement upon like how each other felt in a sense, and like
yeah,
how Armin, like Annie knew essentially that Armin was leading her into a trap
yeah,
from the get-go, and she still went because at a deep level she understood what he was doing and understood like she didn't take offense to it. She was like, all right, so obviously I'm a threat to humanity and obviously you're a friend to humanity, so clearly although you're trying to trick me, I kind of respect you in a way because you're sticking to your guns and
I think the thing with Annie is that she kind of respects competence on like a lot of levels. Like
definitely.
and like that's and like people kind of like overstepping their own bounds. That's why she's like, "Oh, Eric, like Armin, you're brave." It's like Armin doesn't seem like a brave guy, but because he is, he's kind of like, punching above his pay grade, I guess. That sort
Yeah,
of thing.
definitely.
And that kind of combines with like that's like one thing she appreciates, I think, this sort of competence. I think she kind of appreciates it in herself sometimes. Um, well, that's like a little bit of a different topic for a different day. But you know, that's like two things I think we've seen like Annie really respect. This kind of the idea of, sticking to your guns and then just like general competence and bravery, you know,
Which is
good people.
probably why, right? Which is probably why she lost respect for her father, because
Her
he didn't
father,
s-
yeah,
he didn't stick to his guns when he's like the spirit of like, oh, I believe in the mission, I believe, and then he's just like, oh, I was totally wrong, just come home. She's thinking like, oh, wait a minute, you just completely went back on what everything you believed in, which is kind of like the opposite of what she liked in Armin and what she liked in others.
yeah,
I
So,
think I think that implies that Annie never had a real strong emotional upbringing where she could have understood
oh, definitely
that
not.
she was supposed to have feelings in a relationship with her dad that was personal, you know?
Yeah,
to
because
be
all
to be clear, she does love her father. She wants to go back, but it's like it almost kind of reminds me of
It's
Historia in the
totally
way
conflicted.
it's like how stunted all these kids their emotional growth is.
Yeah.
It's
right.
pretty tragic. Um, yeah, when you look at her face when her father tells her the like I was wrong. It's like a
Blank.
look of just like blank shock.
Yeah.
She's just like looks at him in disbelief, like she can't believe what her father is saying.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely agree with that interpretation of this. Just like her father kind of betrayed her, and she still loves him, but like she was betrayed, and she kind of doesn't appreciate that
Or
aspect of
respect,
him
yeah.
anymore. Yeah, doesn't respect him anymore. Yeah. I definitely want more Annie and Aaron, Annie and Armin interactions. Those
For
were
sure.
yeah.
She was a really good foil for both of those two, and at the same time, it unveiled a lot about her.
She works really well with all three of the trio, actually.
Well, her and her her
Well,
and
her and Mikasa is debatable, but it's at the very least an interesting flashback.
yeah. I'd be curious to see if that ever goes, if those two ever interact with each other in the future, because
When
what could they possibly draw between the two of those?
well, Annie just at a fighting level is as much a match for Mikasa as anyone. So they can definitely draw some parallels and some conflict in just that area. But I'm assuming you're referring to emotional ties and such.
Possibly. I mean, it's you could argue maybe that they both have like this connection to Eren, I think, right?
True.
So they could maybe parallel each other over that, or like maybe they're going to be allies the next time she shows up. Maybe not.
Very possible.
Mikasa clearly sees Annie as a threat to Eren.
I think it's kind of both. She sees him as a threat, but I think especially in that flashback, she sees him as a threat. But I think afterwards they're kind of on like good terms, if not good terms, but like they've come to an understanding to each other, because like I think Mikasa recognizes that the person who is like most in tune with Eren, is Annie. Other than she probably believes, other than her and Armin, is Annie, because like during Trost when Eren is missing and Mikasa's like looking for him,
She goes to Annie.
yeah, they regroup, and the first person she talks to, she doesn't like talk to anyone else. She's like, "Hey Annie, do you know where Eren is?" Which like I mean that was like such a minor detail in the beginning, but it's like something that makes sense retroactively looking back. The way that Annie would train Eren,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. I mean, I don't think Eren has shown like he's like that shonen protagonist. He doesn't show like any interest in girls at all. But yeah,
Which is
there's like
great. I love that.
That
There's
line is still confusing.
you need to learn how to talk to girls.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say that Eren is blushing, but she's also choking Eren, so he could just be running out of air. But regardless, I mean, one thought I entertained initially was the fact that Annie like knows, or maybe even or knows or suspects, probably more likely, that Eren may actually be a shifter beforehand, or she just enjoys dropping cryptic lines of bullshit. She just talks like that.
Well,
I'll go for the latter.
She does foreshadow a lot of things that are currently happening.
So it would be a pretty weird thing. I mean, I think it would be kind of weird if she already knew that Eren was a shifter, because I feel like she should have handled that situation differently if she did know.
She definitely trained him like he needed those techniques to fight shifters.
Right. So that's this like this really weird bit about it. I
Because
mean,
that just like adds a whole nother layer of shit to go through to figure this out.
yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, another thing is like we don't know if Eren's shifter powers like are like the regeneration is sort of passive.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's like I feel like that's something Annie could have picked up on. Like they're always sparring. She like I don't know dislocates his shoulder and he's like totally fine. He's like, oh, I just heal fast or something.
Not
But
only
she's
that,
like she picks up on it, starts.
right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Like this is kind of a stretch, but not really. When we already saw when Eren got super mad at the Smiling Titan and he punched it, and then the electricity, and like you saw the panel of each of like
Right.
it
They
was
felt it.
they felt it. Now there have been times, like especially in the mess hall when he was fighting with Jean, when he got heated. Is there a possibility that maybe some of them felt something from Eren and thought maybe this guy might be a Titan?
Well, we did see Reiner and Annie both look at Eren when he was confronting Jean in the mess hall.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we somehow
That's
later on.
a really interesting thought. I feel like if all three of them felt it, then they would have had to have done something about it earlier. But
Yeah, that's true.
Or
maybe
maybe,
maybe just Annie because she spends so much more
yeah,
time with him, I think, right?
Hmm.
That's
right.
implied. Um, if she felt that or if she suspected or if she knew, that's definitely a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised if that was,
But it would be strange to think that she wouldn't act on it sooner.
yeah, definitely.
I mean, maybe she thought she felt something, but she couldn't confirm it,
Which is
and
why she
she,
trains him. You
yeah,
know, it's not just the idealism thing, but she's also has like a practical reason behind it. I could buy that. I would definitely buy that. It's a possibility. Hmm.
I can't help but think that at some point she would have known, and if nothing else, when Reiner, Berthold, and Annie are all present, when Eren emerges from the Titan, I don't know why they're not planning right then to like, hey, let's go freaking break into his barrack thing at night and like
mm,
kidnap him and run off.
the time has to be right though. I mean, I don't know if you want to run off in the middle of a training area. I mean, I think you could be a little more cautious with that. I
Well,
don't
I
know.
mean, if they're just gonna grab him and take him home, who cares?
Well,
Right,
I think that the three of them in general show this tendency towards conservative action, which is unfortunate. I think. I don't think it really was the right
It
decision for
kind
them,
of
but
bit
they
them all
definitely
in the
tend to be.
ass.
They definitely tend to be more conservative than I think they should be. I mean,
It definitely came back to bite all of them in some way.
yeah, being a shifter is rough. I mean,
rough
they
life.
killed tons of people, so like, no real sympathy allowed, I guess. But
The absolute worst thing about it is the reaction that they get from people. You know what I mean? The reaction that they get from people who look at them and just see them as heartless monsters. You know?
It's
And
hard not to though,
and
not to
I
look.
and I've been selling it to people as, yeah, well, I mean, if you look at it basically, that's all you're going to see is because that's what's been sold to you unless you look at it enough.
yeah, for me, it's like, okay, it's like they were children. They were basically child soldiers that were given extremely difficult tasks and mentally broke down, all three of them in different ways, and then had to like, execute extremely complicated tactical decisions on the fly, and with potentially this massive burden of responsibility on them. Like they're basically just like, we do anything we can to survive. I think that's the way they're acting, and like, yeah, they're doing bad things, but on a certain level, I find it difficult to just completely condemn them in my heart.
It's I don't know how to describe the feeling for it, but it just seems wrong to make them one-dimensional in that sense
Yeah,
when you
I mean,
see
I don't think they are at all. So, you know,
I don't know if it's just a knee-jerk reaction to Petra being killed, but
that was rough. I have a friend who's like, oh, I didn't care about Petra. I like when Petra died, I would like freak the fuck out. Like when I read that in the manga, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh man, that was rough. But yeah, I think the thing with on a lot of levels, I think Annie is like hard to sympathize with because the scene where you're supposed to kind of feel sympathy, the scene with her dad can just be like really confusing if you're not thinking about it or paying attention.
mhm.
In comparison to scenes where Reiner has his first person view and you have Bertolt who's like, he has this whole thing about like we want to, like when Connie's like, we said we're gonna grow old together, and Bertolt's
Mhm.
like, who do you think wants to do this? In comparison to Bertolt and Reiner, who have these moments of abject, fear and like moments that you can really sympathize with, Annie doesn't.
Yeah,
Annie,
yeah, that's true.
you know,
She never really got the opportunity to
and like
express that.
Reiner and Bertolt don't kill any characters with names, basically.
Mhm.
Right, like Annie wipes out the SOS squad. She kicks Petra into a tree,
Mhm.
um, and exhibits these like sadistic tendencies at, well, the infamous yo-yo kill that I still don't really understand. you
Yeah,
know
as
so
if she was enjoying it.
she has the most layers to kind of peel back to see that sympathetic core, mainly because she's just so confusing. She got the least amount of exposition, is somehow tied the most to the main character, and doesn't really have any moments of clear sympathy. It's rough. It's a rough sell, definitely.
I always thought her greatest moment of being able to sympathize with her came when from the anime when she broke down. I always thought that was the moment where you're supposed to look at her and see this is the moment where she cracks, and this is the moment where she can't keep up the persona anymore, and everything she's had to do, all her failures, the mission's pressure, the lies she's had to tell, everything just comes crashing down, and she just kind of loses it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's debatable. For me, it's like that moment comes across as more like a little bit of pity that I don't necessarily like throwing on Annie, um, because arguably the manga is pretty different. Like you could say that manga
Yeah, the
Annie tries to
interpretation.
stick to her guns. She knows she's going to probably fail,
Yeah.
but she's like, I said I would do this. I'm going to do this, and that's like. I mean, I think they're both tragic. One is like a breakdown, and one is like a fatalistic decision to keep going despite, probably certain capture or death. There are two different ways of going. There are two different ways to, look at that character.
There's one or two different things about that you can mix and match between
Yeah.
them. Because,
Oh, and you can
because-
definitely interpret the manga scene differently than I did, because that like Isayama's faces are not clear at all. So
Yeah, I mean, clearly, even in the anime with her breakdown, she still clearly had the intention to keep fighting anyway.
right, yeah, it's just definitely had the will. So
Changing between the anime and the manga, the interpretations can definitely change, but I was really sold on the interview of Isayama actually saying that
this is what I meant to do. Yeah.
yeah. Where
I think
he wanted her to convey that pity, basically.
Emotional like vulnerability.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that. I also think it's like kind of this like, oh, female character emotional vulnerability thing. That's like,
Yeah.
I guess it would have been nice to avoid that. I don't really have any major qualms about it. The problem, the Annie thing that bothers me the most in that sequence is probably like the scene where she's like crying, and like Eren sees her crying, and he's like, oh my god, what have I done? That just seemed like so weirdly trite after like everything that happened. But
Yeah.
Oh
it
yeah,
was,
yeah.
it was kind of weird because they didn't show her crying. Annie didn't know, or Eren didn't know she was crying in the actual scene, I believe.
I guess
It
you
was
have
like-
to plant the seed for Eren to really want to investigate further about that later on.
Yeah, the problem was that like I could see Eren like being extremely affected by like say if he saw Annie cry, the way it was set up in the manga where they had like more of a backstory together, but the anime like took out those scenes, and they were like, oh, we're just gonna make him care retroactively, and then there was a scene after that where he was like, oh, it felt good for her to like kick me or something like that, and I was like,
Oh.
it was that like weirdly like masochistic tendencies. I was like, what? When did we ever explore this? But I mean, I think the anime makes like several missteps, not just like decisions they made to do things differently, but like executional missteps. That I mean, it's not really the topic here, but
Well,
I do believe that the thing Isayama said, like that is what he wanted to convey. He just couldn't. I believe that. So
I also believe that. I think some of the things that they cut from the manga that were supposed to be in the anime, that it's a travesty that they're not in the anime. I think they're eventually planning to fill those in with OVAs. So hopefully that happens.
Yeah, it's they made an interesting choice of like removing the kind of villain context from Annie, and then having Eren just like utterly destroy her. That was an interesting change. Since the manga basically went reverse, and the anime fight was like a stomp on in Eren's favor. So I thought that was kind of weird, but
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't really know what angle they're going for with Annie anymore. It's kind of like
It's just because there are too many mysteries and there are too many different ways to interpret everything we know about her. Because the different things that we question just open up more mysteries. Because I mean, you talk about Annie's dad. That's enough to spark all kinds of questioning about motivations between him or her, about what the mission is or isn't, and where the mother is, what roles any of this stuff plays together. It's hard to keep up with any of it.
Yeah, I mean Annie in particular, it's like we don't even know what she wants.
It's true.
like Reiner and Bertolt, right? Well, Bertolt is basically not in his Titan form. Reiner gets first-person perspectives. We get to see his thoughts. In comparison, Annie's thoughts, even in her Titan form, are conveyed by her facial expressions. And I don't know if that's intentional Isayama being like, you're supposed to figure out by the facial expressions, or intentional Isayama being, it's going to be confusing as fuck, figure it out on your own. But regardless, that's like a choice he made to only have Annie's expressions be done through her facial expressions, and that's another point of confusion. The yo-yo scene, we don't know what she's thinking. Is she a sadist? Is she looking at it in some other light? It's just impossible to tell.
It's hard to interpret it any other way. I mean, I don't see.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I think the way it was drawn before, she looked pretty weirdly sympathetic, but the way it's redrawn is definitely more in line with the sadistic interpretation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There are a couple of different ways that I look at it in trying to justify it, and one of the more prominent ones I use is that she, up until the last episode of the anime, she's supposed to be the bad guy. For the second half of that season, Annie is your big bad. She's what you lead up to in the climax. So the expedition is her time to shine as the villain. And if you're gonna paint her as the villain, that's a pretty good way to do it.
Right, but I don't like the fact that Isayama took it upon himself, and I
To
understand.
give her a villain moment.
Yeah, it's because like you can make someone a villain, or you can let that person be
Show
their
it.
own character. If you understand what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Like I don't like that Isayama. This sounds weird, but made her do those things that could be interpreted as like sadistic uh acts of violence. It's like I wanted her to do it because I don't buy that,
She likes
oh
hurting people.
yeah, or not only that, but like
Well,
if she
that's the problem with calling her sadistic for that
I think
action, is that we
in a lot
know
of
that she
ways.
doesn't want to kill people.
Well,
but
I
she
think I made this like kind of like converse this point once, but well, I think one of the things is that kill in particular, like Annie's kills all tend to be like this sort of, she's like this perpetual forward motion. She's like a giant, she's a giant. She's always running forward. She wants to keep moving. Like all of her kills in that sequence, she's always constantly running, and basically they fire the flare at her, and then they all come at her, and she basically never stops moving. And all those kills are fast kills because she's just going straight for like efficiency kills. But the last guy she catches is basically caught when she's like stopped moving, and she has no forward momentum. She has no, she's not going for this efficient kill, which is why she does like the spinning attack, the yo-yo spin. I mean, that's not like a real emotional explanation for what she's doing,
Because
but
of
it's like the
momentum.
one kill that sets apart the yo-yo guy from the others, like
Mhm.
when she's running through the trees, she'll just like ram people between trees with her body. She never does these crazy kills when she's running because obviously she's prioritizing forward movement. Um, it's hard to tell what she's doing. You know, it's just such a confusing scene. It's just such a confusing character.
Well, we know for a fact that she does not enjoy killing people. She gets no benefit from it. Killing people doesn't do her any good services. So it doesn't make any
uh,
sense that she would kill the yo-yo guy like that.
Well, I actually don't think that she's like extremely adverse to killing people so much as has this like problem with killing people that she knows. Like she doesn't kill Armin, she doesn't kill Jean. She may have. We will never actually really know what her true intent was because Armin did that whole yelling thing. But
Well,
there's also this scene. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Let me just final thing. There's a scene where she's being chased by Mikasa, and she doesn't try to kill her, and instead just kind of like aims for the tree, and like when Mikasa is cutting her up, absolutely just like slicing through most of her tendons, she doesn't do anything. But the second Levi shows up, she immediately goes for like a punch. I mean, you could argue that that's just like, good, tactical fighting. But I also think it kind of demonstrates a consistent reluctance on her part to kill people that she's familiar with, but maybe not so much with other people that she's not as familiar with.
I think you can make the argument that she's only killing people who are getting in the way of her mission, but she's still showing her reluctance, like you said, to killing these people. But she has to kill some of them to not get dogpiled by the amount of people who are chasing her.
But then there are other instances where she doesn't necessarily need to kill them, she can just disable them, especially when she's stopped. I understand when you're in forward momentum and you can't, pick apart someone's maneuver gear and then throw them to the side. But if you're stopped, like in the yo-yo kill, you could easily disarm that person and they would be no threat to you. Yet she chooses to kill them in a almost looks like it's a pleasurable way because there's no other way, like there's no reason to kill in that way besides if you get pleasure out of it. So
But that's the strange thing is that we know that she doesn't get it from that.
well, how do we know that?
Well, I think like I personally subscribe to this idea that she's like she enjoys being good at things. That's why she kind of like gloats like her victories over Eren kind of a little bit. It's like she enjoys being good at things. She doesn't necessarily enjoy killing, which is what makes that one kill very. We don't know if that kill is like an aberration or if it's like, more in line with what she normally thinks. I will say one piece of evidence. When she falls, this is in Stois, when she falls through the church and she sees all the civilians and she looks vaguely, I would say horrified, I think, about that. Like, I think she's pretty loath to kill civilians, but is not so much so to kill maybe soldiers or people who, yeah, like Stiller said, explicitly stand in her way.
Then again, I don't think like those two guys who were opposing her at that instance would have been perceived as a significant enough threat that she would have distinguished them from civilians.
True, but I think it's more like in her mind there's a distinction between someone who's like a soldier or a warrior and a civilian. And that like she it looks like she actively kind of avoids killing civilians but has no real qualms about killing soldiers, even if she doesn't explicitly want to do it most of the time,
Right.
I guess. But it's impossible. It's impossible to judge basically based on what we have. So
Fair enough, I think.
I mean, that's just like one possibility. I don't really know like what this picture of Annie I have in my head isn't like a consistent one. So
Yeah. Back to the visual novel.
oh man. Oh, what other?
The other really only other big thing to talk about is the ending, where after she has her final flashback, thinking about her father telling her about abandoning her mission, and she basically says she can't let anything or anyone interfere with it. She'll do whatever it takes to accomplish it. And then she goes to bed and she cries herself to sleep. That's that.
She's about to cry, but she doesn't let any of the tears fall, and then she
Yeah.
sleep. Right.
That's
But
a pretty powerful image.
I would say that the first part with her father, that pretty much perfectly summarizes like what we know. Her father basically betrays her trust in him, and she's like, okay, my father, that was all wrong. I don't know what he's doing, but now I'm going to decide to myself. I'm going to promise to myself that I will complete this mission. So that kind of actually gels pretty well with I think her mindset, what we think her mindset is, moving ahead, how it was, before the expedition when she was with Eren even during the trainee arc. So that makes sense. Yeah, the final bit, that was sad.
And the last line specifically, fell into a deep sleep. Like that line being written like that, being a reference pretty well to her being crystallized and what you might call that a deep sleep.
Yeah, it's almost like fairy tale-esque
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. The crystallization and that line being written in that way.
The whole crystallization thing and the potential theory for using shards of her crystal that Hanji has to start cracking away at the crystal, I think is another topic in itself where we look at what that crystal even is, you know?
Yeah, it's yeah. What the crystal is pretty interesting. It's what? It's just an extremely hard substance that we can't break, apparently.
Which means not just a like it's not a diamond. It has to be a specific because you can still chip away at diamond. It's not like it's very hard, but I mean, eventually you can chip away at any amount of any material. So there's some special component. I mean, I know that Attack on Titan doesn't necessarily directly correlate with magic, although we do know that like the lightning appearing randomly from the sky to transform is some form of I mean you could call it magic, but I don't
The
like to call it
lightning
magic.
stuff, by the way, is really like bizarre because like when Annie shifted her hands, did lightning show up?
Didn't
Or
say. I don't
no?
think.
It's like I feel like the lightning thing was kind of like a mistake on Isayama's part, where he kind of probably shouldn't have thrown that in because
It's very magic-esque, if not
it is
magic.
though. I mean,
So
they're basically creating matter out of nothing. They're
out of
creating more matter.
electricity, if
Yeah.
you I mean electricity is like the most scientifically so non-magic way of putting it. But for all intents and purposes, you're summoning lightning. That's essentially magic. So, I would say that the crystal may be made of some. I don't want to say magical component, but it may be charged with whatever helps charge their Titan bodies in a sense to help make it a barrier upon like material items that normally would be able to chip away eventually at anything because I can't rationalize. Oh, well, this is too hard. This material, nothing can crack it. It's like, well, that
I
doesn't make any
think
sense.
another like I something I kind of entertained or kind of dismissing it is the idea that there is harder steel out there that the military police is still withholding some sort of science.
Mm.
Maybe inside the inner walls they can generate their own crystals. Maybe the crystal is the basis for the steel that can only be forged in the inner walls. Like we don't know. Um, at this point, we kind of just have to assume that the Survey Corps is kind of consistently being hamstrung by the military police in terms of the sort of equipment potential they have.
This has the potential. And this is getting meta for a second, but this has the potential to be such a great, and I mean, it already is a great anime, but like, it could pull this all together. If it answers all the pertinent questions, it could be so fantastic. But at the same token, it set itself up for greatness and also failure if it can't meet because it set up so many questions that are so grand that if you don't answer them it's like oh I feel so cheapened.
This is the benefit of having the story planned out before you get to the finale. Because
I mean, on a certain
if,
sense. Oh wait, no, still you can go.
if you had gotten to this point in the manga and then still had to finish writing the ending, I think you'd have been fucked. But going into it from the beginning and having an idea of how you want it to end, maybe not even having it nailed down, but you have a benchmark where you say, okay, I want this to be the image for the end of the show. I think that I think that's going to keep him on track. Despite things having changed since he originally planned it out, I think he definitely still has the ability to keep things on track.
No, I completely agree with that. I'm just saying like he set up okay the lightning that comes out of thin air in order to transform and the crystal which is seem like it would be so easy for Isayama to write in, oh, this was a healing crystal in order for her to regenerate her strength, and then once she regained full power, she broke out of the crystal, and then just
Return of Superman style.
well, I mean, it could so easily go that route, and it's just like I hope that he takes the time to like devotes enough time to these specific phenomena like the lightning out of thin air and the crystal and the properties of it and explains it in a way that satisfies our desire to know like what it is instead of just like saying it's there, deal with it.
Mm.
I mean, for me, it depends. I watched all of Lost. I'm like
Oh
I'm
my
like
God.
fully prepared for like a finale where we don't get a lot of concrete answers.
I
And
would
as
hate
long
that.
as long as the way we get there is satisfactory enough for me, I think I'll take it. I mean, Lost finale wasn't awful by any stretch of the imagination. I think
Agree
a
to
lot of people,
disagree.
I mean, I think a lot of people hated it. I know a lot of people hate it, but it was basically like one half of a good finale. It was like it was like, yay, we got all the character moments we kind of wanted and some character moments we didn't. Like, I don't give a fuck about Shannon, but um, it was everything else that was completely unresolved. But like looking back, I've come to kind of appreciate that more. Like, if only to kind of get over my pure disappointment with it.
I was
So
so disappointed.
like
Still am.
if we don't get all the answers, I will live with it, and I will probably not condemn it as harshly as I initially condemned Lost finale because that was, but I've like learned to temper my expectations a little bit in terms of getting concrete answers that are supremely satisfying and explain everything. But if that's not how it ends, I'll probably look back. I'll look at the characters and the development, and hopefully those will still have been stellar, and I'll enjoy it for what it was. But
I
I do want
completely,
the good answers
yeah,
though.
I completely agree. It's just, I guess it's more on just a basic level. I don't want this to be an anime that only covers superficially the large premises and the large questions it raises. I want it to go a little deeper and to have a little more effort because this is an anime that deserves to have the effort put in, whereas other animes may be able to get away with, oh, just lightning, that's cool. Oh, just a crystal, that's cool. It's like I want this anime to go a little deeper,
From
and
what
that's it.
we've seen so far, everything is in place for it to do that. There's nothing.
So hopefully,
There's
yeah,
not. From what we've seen so far, there's nothing to. There's no evidence to say that it's not going to go in that direction.
right.
But and as far as it goes, I think we've proven with this Abberant that some of the characters are pretty deep.
We could probably do one for each of the shifters. It would probably be equally long.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm
Uh,
sure because
Yeah.
man, there's some stuff.
there is.
There's some stuff to talk about. And we have definitely run a lot longer on time than I anticipated. So I think with that in mind, having discussed, I think, a lot of the things that we have at great length, despite there being more things that we could go into, because I don't even think we've even begun to talk about thematics with Annie. And so I think we're going to go ahead and call it a wrap for this Aberrant. And I hope everybody's enjoyed. And thank you, Getting the Robot, for being on. And we will see you guys next month on the next cast on Titan.
All right. See ya. Thanks for having me on.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Awesome.
Ugh.
That
You
was
did
great.
it.